What did you say the other day? You were like, oh, we could just be like full JC Beals and just say it's all a contradiction or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think that the more I read into logic, the more I'm with just saying like whatever the correct account of logic
Yeah,
is, it's realist in nature and derivative of God or sustained by God in that sense. Um, yeah, it's
that's
yeah, because it's not like J.C. Beale has terrible arguments. Like he's got an interesting view, and given that I'm committed to saying that God in some way transcends logic, obviously, or at least is like I would have trouble saying that anything that has like real application in our world isn't somehow reflective of God. So how exactly that works in relation to logic seems still mysterious.
sure. Yeah. No, that's the same approach I take. Take the same approach. Uh, don't really care what system of logic you want to use. It could be one so strange I might need more information before we can talk about it, but really don't care.
Yeah. Um, it's why like I was arguing with this atheist earlier and they want to say, well, what if I can pose a contradiction to you? And it's like, well, bro, I mean, until you have like some knockdown, drag out argument against Graham Priest or something. Well, first I told him it's like it has. I would probably end up objecting to like the analyticity of just how you're using these terms that you think you've arrived at a contradiction. But I'm not even convinced that our like why should we be wedded to classical logic if all these other logics have clear applications, especially when we're talking about the fundamental nature of reality that I'm going to want to say is God, and I'm going to have some type of skeptical theistic account of how much we can understand about God. It's almost like, do you remember Stewart from SNL, or maybe it was Mad TV? Remember that?
I don't. I didn't
The
watch a lot
little,
of that.
the like grown man who was like still a little kid, and he would be like, "Look what I can do! Look what I can do!"
I
I
remember that.
don't know.
Here, let me
Michael
let me pin it.
McDonald.
Can you make me a mod? I'll pin it.
Yeah, one second. Make moderator. There you go.
Uh,
Would you mind if I made a comment about oh, just
About
about what you guys have just discussed?
one little comment, just directed towards you, Elliot. What's your thoughts of pronouns? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Give me your thoughts.
My pronouns
Oh yeah,
are
yeah. I remember that.
yeah. So just to wrap this up real quick. Sorry, Elliot. That's what I feel like the atheist is doing. They're going, look what I can do, look what I can do. And so that's why it's like I find oftentimes we have to deliberate between good and like apparent goods and actual goods, just like we have to deliberate between apparent contradictions and actual contradictions.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
I
Elliot.
think from my hey yeah like as an atheist, I feel like when I hear that I think that I kind of just grant that there's ways of like defining or maybe even not defining God such that like he can't be touched by like the tools of like logical analysis, right? He's just kind of like you just kind of defined him into sort of like this um you know like airlock, right? Where he's just like where all of our clumsy little like logical inference making procedures can't even get at him. And maybe that works for like some kind of like being as like simpliciter, but right, but like the instant that the theist, I feel like, then goes on to start making claims about like anything that it touches like our empirical reality, um then all of that becomes fair game. And so
Well, just
it's like
real quick, the
yeah
thing that you're deriding right there, this like tautological analyticity issue. My claim is that your system is rife with that same thing if we dig deep enough.
Potentially, yeah. In which case, like, I wouldn't be able to defend it against a like, like, I wouldn't be able to defend myself against someone who like sincerely doubted like one of those things potentially, right? Because it would just be like, well, I don't have any answers for you. And so like if your response is like actually like the Christian and the atheist are like the same boat, I think that's going to work out worse for at least for any kind of transcendental argument I'm aware of for God than for the skeptic. But I think the problem does get worse once you start appealing to things like revelation and biblical inerrancy and prayer and interpretation of passages and messiahs and substitutionary penal atonement, like all of this other architecture of Christianity. I just think is all going to kind of like be fair game, even if you can say like at the end of the day I have this like concept or this model of God that's like untouchable by your pathetic little logical critiques.
Well, I mean, look, all I would say is that what constitutes, or like what's constitutive of evidence and facts and truth and logical veridicality, and all of that is going to be based on your worldview. And your worldview is going to be founded upon presuppositions or axioms that are going to be unjustified. So all your notions of these things are going to be ultimately unjustified in some deeper way. So it's just not, this is the problem with everyone's system that no one wants to talk about. And obviously, we believe that there is, we're realists and committed to like, metaphysical realism, things actually being the case. Whereas, depending on what flavor of atheist you are, you might just be a conventionalist about logic or something like that. So, cross worldview discussion is very, very difficult. And maybe we have something in common that we can share across the worldview that we can use to analyze. But all we're left with is internal critiques and external critiques.
Oh, those are like the only two that I'm familiar with.
Well, yeah, but what I mean about that is that like you can do an internal critique and you'll be dissatisfied, or we can do an external critique and you'll likewise be dissatisfied.
Well, yeah, which is typically why the procedure in the like a dialectic, right? You're just gonna find the things that you like both stipulate, and then you're gonna kind of work from those things to the things you dispute. But of course, if you're kind of in the like, I think that precept kind of cannily. I don't know if you sound kind of precepty to me, but if you are, then maybe this is for you. You kind of cannily just sort of undercuts that entire project by just kind of declaring there's no neutrality. So we can't even begin the process of like finding, sort of like where our circles overlap because they don't, not even in the most like, trivial or obvious seeming things. In which case, yeah, I would agree with you. If that actually were the case, then it would make any kind of like critique between people of opposing camps utterly impossible. But then how would like a tag argument even get off the ground? Like, what would it even be for?
Remember what he said. He's working with a metaphysic where the things going on in his epistemology stick to the way things are going on in the world. So the common ground that we share is not going to be a result of something, or at least not necessarily the result of something we stipulate in a conversation, although I think that's pretty easy to come by. But it's going to be the result of the fact that we're both made in the image of God, right? There's this metaphysical backdrop that is doing the job of giving us the ground that we can both stand on and share things.
I think that's like maybe a slightly different meaning of common ground than what I like. Common ground being like the things that both parties stipulate, right?
I take common ground to be like content that both of your worldviews share, um, which is, coming from some kind of shared metaphysical backdrop. Is like the idea.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I got a call in the middle of that, and it always messes with my Clubhouse when I get a call.
Bro, I feel you. Oh man, do I feel your pain on that one. What I said was that I think I don't think we're disagreeing about what sounds like a disagreement. What I was saying is where common ground comes from, right? So um, whether or not you explicitly affirm something in a conversation or not, I take it for granted that people share beliefs and they share experiences and things like that. But that all requires some kind of metaphysical backdrop in which that obtains, and that was the point of Truthy talking about realism, is because from the Christian point of view, we all live in a created universe and we image God. That's just part of our constitution. And so it's not really up to us whether we stipulate this or that. We don't really have a choice in the matter but to share something in common in the content we're using. Like even now as we're speaking English, right? Would be like a very simple example.
Yeah, so and like as a physicalist, I would say that like what undergirds all of our ability to like communicate is like physical interactions of like um, physical bodies, right, or physical entities or fields or what have you. But like I wouldn't use that. Like I wouldn't say therefore that like that's not your account of like why it is that the external world exists, right? But even though you and I have a different account of why the external world exists, we can at least agree that the external world does exist. So like I don't need to like hector you to like prove the external world exists on Christian theism, and vice and vice versa, because we all like in the dialectic, we both already agree that the external world exists. I have a different account of that than you do. And maybe if your account is like self-contradictory or your account violates some other principle that you hold, I could point that out to you and it'd be an effective internal critique. Or if it leads to some kind of absurd outcome, that might be an effective like reductio, right? But like
Yeah,
the
well,
point that
I
I'm
think
making is
that's.
about yeah.
I'm not sure at that point how you were disagreeing with Truthy, because it just sounds like you're saying we both, believe there's an external world. I have a different account of it, and Truthy's point is, okay, well, but the difference between our systems is we have revelation, right? We've got a justification for our beliefs. But if we investigate your epistemology, that there's no alternative there. We're gonna run out of ground, and it's either gonna divulge into wishful thinking or pure stipulation or something like that.
Yeah, but of course I don't think you have revelation. So I'm just gonna be like, you're, like, well, what common ground that we share could you appeal to substantiate the claim that you have revelation? And if there's nothing like that, then it seems like that's just like where the dialogue ends, right? Because it's like, well, otherwise I'm just gonna hear like a circular argument or something.
I think so. I think the issue is like you're going to have some kind of criteria for adjudicating what revelation is, right? And that's part of the contention already, because it seems like Christianity has that, but I don't know how a physicalist would come up with that criterion. But he has a major, I mean, any kind of physicalist would have a huge underdetermination problem if he can't find such a criterion, because then he has no way of favoring a physicalist account of his own beliefs, and so would not be in a position to doubt whether or not Truthy or the other people in this room have revelation.
Well, I would say that even if I was agnostic about physicalism, right? Which I'm like, if you catch me on the right day, I kind of am, right? Because I think there are problems. I just think it, on balance, is the best account that I've encountered so far. But I'm not like, I don't hold to it by faith. I just hold, I hold it because at that moment it's like the one that is most convincing to me. But I could just as easily I could imagine myself being persuaded of like Platonism, right? I could imagine myself being persuaded of other like metaphysics. But like my question about like why should I think that you have revelation would still be the same regardless.
Sure, but my point is like, what's the standards for convincing you?
Well, I think you would like it seems like in order to make a persuasive claim, right, you would need to show or like you would need to like be able to show something that I can see, right, or not necessarily like see with my eyes, right, but like something that I stipulate or something that I would at least recognize that, and you would need to be able to explain how that would be like only expected on the on the model or the circumstance where you had the kind of revelation you claim. And I probably have a lot of questions about where your revelation before we even got there. But like I feel like that's where it would go, right? It would just be like, well, okay, define revelation. It's some kind of like propositional communication from God. Okay, um, and how do you know it's from God, right? And then we kind of go like that. But I feel like it really
Well,
wouldn't be like I'd be more interested in it'd be more immediately relevant what your criteria are for determining that a revelation is from God versus what my criteria are for rejecting it. I think that's probably properly where like the burden would lie if you're making that claim.
Go ahead, Truthy, but I'll just say this real quick. No, it's not, right? So everybody's making a claim about whether or not the objects of their experience are revelatory or not, right? Like you're claiming to be agnostic about physicalism. Okay, well, I mean that insinuates that you're at best agnostic about Christianity. So that's the claim to be someone who's not experiencing any kind of sufficiently supporting evidence for Christianity, like revelation. Okay, well, that's just as much a claim as the Christian is making.
yeah, and I was going to say something similar too, that like the second, just notice that the second you ask for whatever it's going to be, right? Some demonstration, some great argument, what the truth conditions are for certain things on our system, you're going to be, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, bringing all your presuppositions, biases, everything to the table to assess them. So in some sense, you're saying, well, you know, grant me all my presuppositions in my assessment of your presuppositions, and let's see what we can accomplish here. And what I'm trying to say is that it's not about, nor has it ever been about great arguments. It's certainly not about evidence, because what's constitutive of evidence is going to be different on the systems. So, I mean, on our view, uh, these things are known and they're suppressed, right? And you're going to say, well, I don't know them, so that's BS. And we could just make that same, switch and say, okay, well, what's your evidence for that? And then we're going to get into talking about your theory of knowledge, right? Your justification criteria for your justification criteria. And maybe we could
Well, yeah.
demonstrate that. I'll just land the point real quick here, which is that, so maybe we could demonstrate that like you're unjustified or something. Do you think that's going to be of any consequence to you?
Well, no, like I would never try to persuade you about like my mental states, right? Like that's not even an argument, and like that wouldn't be the thing that I wouldn't even attempt to persuade you of it, right? Because like I don't have a way to like give you access to my internal mental state. So you can either choose to believe it or if you don't, if you think I'm like systematically deluded or lying or something like that, that's just up to you. And I don't use my mental states to like run an argument, right? So like I don't have a version of tag that relies upon you accepting like some mental state of mine as a proposition. But like if you have an argument or if you have like a diet like a strategy that relies on and every argument relies on presuppositions that I don't object to. I just don't think you should smuggle the conclusion in as one of those presuppositions, especially if it's disputed, because then we just have to have a new argument about that disputed premise,
Okay. Can you
right?
give an
So like
example of that?
yeah, sure. So like you said, for instance, like we'll take the classic tag, right? God is a necessary
Oh,
precondition for intelligibility.
wait. Sorry.
Yeah.
That we're two ships passing the night there. I was asking not for an example of smuggling the conclusion. I'm asking for example of your statement that the way to go about doing this is to have an argument that doesn't start smuggling your conclusion. Okay, how would you go about giving an argument that there are people that don't know God without smuggling in the conclusion, for example?
I don't know that I would make an argument that there are people that don't know God. I don't know that that would be like the conclusion of an argument that I would make. I could
And
imagine it
so,
being like it might be implied by the conclusion of an argument I would make. Like, and it like yeah, I have to think about that. I might
and
say, for instance, that like or sorry,
I
go
just
ahead,
real
Truth.
quick, I just wanted to make one quick comment on what you had replied to me with, which was that you said you wouldn't use your mental states to like, kind of bring in an argument or something like that. My point was that you absolutely are smuggling in your mental states when you presuppose certain things, or you have a justification criteria that or something that's non-inferential, or we're all smuggling in a lot of things. That was my point. So you are in some, if we dig deep enough, using your mental states that you won't be able to justify somehow.
Well, I'm about to say I wouldn't use them like if you disputed them, I wouldn't be like, well, okay, like I'm just gonna put them in there, right? Because like and usually like in a conversation, you just agree, like it's kind of stipulated, right? That like you are representing your thoughts to me and vice versa, and we actually can communicate intelligibly. But like for instance, an argument that like I wouldn't run against a Calvinist is something like or like or that I wouldn't run. I shouldn't say Calvin. I wouldn't run against a Christian. It's something like the Bible says that every non-believer knows that God exists. I don't know that God exists. Therefore, the Bible is false, right? And the reason I like the reason I wouldn't run that isn't because the premises aren't true. Because I think the premises are true. I just wouldn't like. It would be uninteresting to try to like use like my account of my knowledge to persuade you, because you could just deny that, right? And I don't even think like if you did deny it, then that would just terminate the entire conversation, right? There's not like a proof I could give you, like, no, I really don't know God exists, and you could be like, yeah, you really are just suppressing it, right? And that is like that doesn't get you anywhere. So like that's an example of of like a reverse argument that like someone like me could run, but like wouldn't, for precisely the reason that it would just like I would be begging the question.
I think so. I think that's the issue, right? Is that um, at the outset the question is like, well, both of us seem to believe things like knowledge is possible. We're speaking in English. Elliot's a nice guy, and this has been a decent conversation so far. Blah blah blah. Right. So we got these things that we think we know, but we have two very different accounts of how that's done. And going back to Truthy's original point, like the question is, which of our epistemologies gets off the ground? Because if you're saying, you doubt this Christian account, or you think revelation is a problem, or all these things, all of those beliefs are motivated by and hinging on your epistemology. So if the epistemology is shown to be problematic, those beliefs fall to the wayside, right?
I mean, it would really depend on in what way the epistemology was shown to, like, if like it was shown to be problematic, right? Like there could be ways that are like immaterial to like to like those conclusions. But I mean,
Well,
the burden to me,
suppose
the burden of
there's
proof thing is, or sorry, go ahead.
well, just to answer your question real quick, suppose there's no reason to believe Eliot's uh, take on unbelief, like your account of how you don't need Christian revelation or anything to know things.
So like if something like Plantinga's like evolutionary argument against naturalism went through or something like that.
I guess if you had a fun, if your epistemology is essentially evolutionary like that, then I guess that argument would be a good example.
Okay. So you like if you could show that like my epistemology was the product of like some kind of like I don't know, arbitrary process, like untethered from reality or something like that. But yeah, that would give me like reason to be skeptical of my own conclusions and my own like thought processes. It wouldn't falsify them, right? Which is like it's a distinction that's worth keeping in mind, right? So
I don't see how it wouldn't.
oh, I mean, like it wouldn't, you could still I could still be accidentally true, or I could still be incidentally true, or be making incidentally true observations, even if they weren't reliably produced. Like
Okay, but
even if
your belief that beliefs could be accidentally true, independent of your epistemology, is a belief you hold because of your epistemology.
well, the thing is, if you take that position, then presumably you would have like an account of why that's not the case, right? So like if you want to say something like, well, you only believe that because let's just say, let's just imagine that you've run the Plantingian argument on me, and I've been like, yeah, I really do have reason to doubt a lot of my conclusions. I would still say, so, I'd still be like, but don't you agree that that doesn't entail the falsity of my beliefs,
Ah,
right?
so so then I would say I think that's a very good way of putting it, right? So then I would say yes, but I think the point there is that the very process of asking me to agree there after we've critiqued your epistemology, the point there is whose epistemology are we using to reach that judgment? Well, mine, the Christian one.
Potentially, right? Like maybe the Christianity part of it is incidental to that, to you reaching that
No,
conclusion.
definitely, right?
But
There's only the way Elliot in this conversation. There's only the way Elliot thinks, and there was the way Jimmy thinks. I guess it's the way
well,
Truthy
yeah,
thinks
but
here.
like it could be the case that like Christianity has led you to like a position that even if that like on analysis you could drop like the Christian elements, and if you still had that position, that like epistemically you'd be in a better position than Eliot. But the point is that it would be stipulated by both parties in the conversation, right? So then it wouldn't be an issue anymore. It'd be like, okay, so we both agree that it doesn't falsify the things that I'm saying. I've encountered the evolutionary argument
Because
against, yeah,
because Christian epistemology is true.
that also is not an entailment. And I think that even if you were asked to produce the entailment from within Christian epistemology, I doubt you could produce the entailment from the first proposition to the second.
So I disagree, right? But I think the issue is that, right, the reason you don't think that entailment follows fundamentally is because of your own epistemology, and that's the point that Truthy keeps getting back to. Is like you've got this idea of how knowledge works, and that's fair. Like nobody's saying like how dare you, but we've got to be self-conscious of our own beliefs when we're having this conversation, and it really comes down to the fundamental question, like how do you know anything at all? How do you know knowledge is possible? How does your epistemology get off the ground? What's step one? Where's this? Not acute. I'm not saying you have to play the foundationalist game, but like, how where are we going to get some knowledge? What's
Yeah,
Well, and if Elliot, if I could just back up on what he's saying there, is like what's instructive here is like how do you answer the problem criterion?
how do you answer the what problem?
The problem of the criterion.
Oh, uh, do you want me from like to give you an answer to the problem with the criterion?
Yes, because I think how you answer that is instructive.
Yeah. So I guess I would like. I guess I would say it really depends, like kind of what mood you catch me in. So if I'm like feeling very foundationalist, right, which is like I tend to be. I tend to be very sympathetic toward foundationalism.
Just to be clear here, you're epistemologically fluid.
Yes. Is that problematic?
It's more just interesting. It's like
well, I think it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it. that's what I predicted, right? So what I said earlier in the conversation was like, look, I think the differences between our epistemology are going to be that, you keep asking why, or if you keep asking what, or whatever, right? If you investigate a Christian's system of epistemology and they believe in this kind of revelational epistemology, then it's going to cash out in, well, God's created the world, and part of that means he has made human beings and he's designed their psychology, and part of that is he's set what the basic content of that is, and that involves him revealing himself, blah, yada yada yada. So fundamentally, if we want to put it oversimplistically, it's, well, God says, right? But if we go to your system, it's going to reduce to, well, this is how I prefer to think. But that's not a good
Well,
reason to believe anything, right? That's just wishful thinking.
well, it's not necessarily wishful thinking, and it really is kind of like it's trying to give an account of like what I mean by knowledge, right? So it's not necessarily that like my entire method of thinking is just changing, but it's more so me like having a changing account of like what I think it means to have something like knowledge, right? So like if I were to ask you, how do you tell the difference between veridical and non-veridical revelation? What would you say?
I would say I tell the difference by having it.
You tell the difference by having veridical revelation.
Right.
And how do you tell that you have veridical revelation?
By having it.
By having it? Yeah.
The
So
experience of revelation is the sufficient condition for knowing what
okay,
it is.
okay, but Elliot, this is why, and you didn't really answer my question. This is why your answer to the problem of the criterion really matters, because he just took one of the horns, and I want to know which one you take.
yeah. So I tend to think that the how do you know is just going to be prior to like what do you know, right? So whatever like the method before uh, quality horn is. And it's been a while since I've like thought about this, but
Wait, sorry, hold on. You're saying that you think you can be a Methodist without being a particularist first?
I think that you have to devise a method in order to even say that something counts as any given kind of particular.
But see, this is what
Oh
Chisholm.
boy, that's a problem.
Yeah, this is the whole problem. Like Chisholm's going to say, no, we have to start. Like the solution to this seeming intractable problem is that we've got to start with what we know, because we have to start with something we know to be able to construct how we know it. One of the two horns presupposes that you know something, the other one doesn't.
I just think you're going to be equivocating with knowledge there, right? Because I think that whatever you like it is to call it knowledge in the first instance is just not going to be methodological knowledge, which is the kind of like knowledge that we're concerned with generating in the first place.
Well, I mean, Jimmy, you can go ahead
Well,
and reply. Yeah.
yeah. So I think this is interesting, but and we can come back to this, and this is relevant. But I don't. It seems to me like your method, Elliot, has been stated to be however you feel in the mood that day, right? And so my problem is, well, I mean, in practice, that's wishful thinking. That's saying, I feel like today I'm going to believe, I'm going to believe I'm the king of England, and I'm going to say that these trees over here are my concubines. We're going to have some heated passion right now because I'm the king of England. Right? You can decide, you can play make believe and decide that you want to believe whatever you want, and that I think that's kind of sad. I think you're smarter than that, but
I think
that's
it's
the
slightly
epistemology that you're conveying.
that's not quite it. Right? Again, the method is a method of like accounting for knowledge, right? So it's not it's me like if and when I do change my mind, it's because some new wrinkle has occurred to me about like this thing that I've been trying to kind of grasp, right? That we all try to grasp, like it's like knowledge and how is it constituted, and maybe there's a better way to think about how it's constituted, right? So it's not just saying like, oh, I'm just going to think that I'm the king of England or something like that. It's me thinking like it's more so thinking like, well, uh, is this really knowledge and virtue of the fact that it's say like JTB? But then what do I do about Gettier cases? Do I become some kind of like reliabilist, right? And that entire progression isn't me like just completely changing my cognition and how I like form beliefs about the world, but rather just changing how I think about the categories of beliefs I have.
Okay, so it seems like we've got a really vicious circle here. On the one side, I wouldn't know how you would begin to ask those questions if you didn't know a whole bunch of particular items of knowledge. I mean, how do you ask questions about the Gettiers case without some kind of historical chronology of experiences where you've picked up a book and read about it, or somebody's told you about it, or you know how to get to the word Gettier, like, and that's just one of the things you said. What about the fact that you're gonna have to think about how to um, work your job and operate your time so that you have time to think about these things, and that it can be distinct from having a conversation with Sally down the street, right? Like, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of beliefs up there in what you just said. And if you didn't know all of those,
Of course.
all of that insane amount of stuff, how would you even begin to ask the question? But what you said just a moment ago is that you can't really know in the sense that we're really after unless you first had the method for getting there. And you're saying, and you're asking questions about that method, right? As if you don't have it. Well, that's a problem, right? Because you couldn't ask the questions without the knowledge, and you're saying you couldn't have the knowledge without the method, and the method is the very thing you're asking about, as if you don't have it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an equivocation about knowledge going on here, right? Because, and again, in order for me to have like the distinct concepts, right, that are going to go into a method, you might be tempted to call those knowledge, but because they're not like methodologically produced, I'm just not sure like why I would do that, right?
If they're
The
not
method
methodologically
itself, right?
produced, why would they be relevant to the epistemic enterprise?
Because they're constitutive of the method that we need for that entire enterprise, for epistemology to
But
get off the ground.
that's just to say that the behavior, the set of behaviors of Eliot asking these questions is the definition of the enterprise of epistemology. I don't think
No,
that Eliot is the standard of knowledge.
yeah, I don't actually think that either. I do think that in order to ask questions uh, about knowledge, you do have to ask about how is knowledge even produced or justified, right? And I think that's especially the case if you're talking about like in a dialectic, right, where you're talking about items of knowledge that you claim that others don't claim, or that others might even dispute. And again, it just won't do to say like, well, I just kind of have this knowledge that you don't, but it's not listed for you to like ask me how it was produced or anything because it's just completely, pre-methodological. Like,
I don't. I don't think
where
it's.
is?
I don't think it's
I'm not sure where the
pre-methodological.
diet where it goes from there. Well, I mean, like you would say that there's no methodology from that led you to, or that from which you derived the knowledge that like you have revelation from God or that the Bible is divinely inspired. I take it, or do you, or would you say you do have a methodology that led you to that belief?
It depends on what you mean by a methodology, right? But how would you know whether something is a methodology or a particular item of knowledge unless you already knew some things, right? So it's again, like, the difference between our systems is that you seem to agree just a moment ago that, like, yeah, you have to ask these questions before you get knowledge, and I just showed you like what follows from that. There's a really big problem. On my system, we start with God's answer to those questions, and that's why we're able to ask them afterwards.
I guess I'm just not sure in virtue of what you call that knowledge. Like, what do you like? It's like I think the issue is that really that kind of sailing past each other on like what it would even mean to call something knowledge. So like you have a belief that like God has revealed things to you and that the Bible is His word. But like in virtue of what do you call that knowledge?
I don't know. What are we, for the sake of the conversation, what are we considering knowledge?
Well, really, that's my question. And we're kind of both asking each other sorts of questions, right? But like maybe a more fundamental question would be like, what, like you would say that the Bible is God's word, like, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you like? do you have some kind of like a JTB account of knowledge when like that you have in mind when you say that, or like what do you mean when you say you know it?
I think you can go deeper than that, but I think that's a perfectly good. I think it's good shorthand for what knowledge is. Sure.
Okay.
Right.
And
So,
then so
and
where's
my charge
oh
here, right, is that like, look, if God creates you and designs your consciousness and your psychology, and he communicates to you that he exists, and that's just part of what it means to be human, is he's set up your consciousness to have God consciousness. That seems like a very good reason to think that you know God. But if you have to ask questions about how you can know things before you can know anything, and the very enterprise of asking questions requires knowledge of a whole lot, that seems like a system that's dead out of the water.
yeah, I don't think it again I would say that like there's an equivocation of knowledge going on there. And some people do make distinctions between like
What's the
different
equivocation?
kinds of knowledge. Well, because like whatever like postulates or like conceptual entities go into your method, right? They're not going to be knowledge in the same sense that something produced from your method
I
is
mean,
going to
how would
be.
you go about postulating if you don't know how to postulate, or know what a postulate is, or know the things to be postulated? Right? Like
Yeah, so
it
I mean,
seems to me like
like
you're not paying attention to the fact that literally anything you do with your mind requires knowledge.
Well, and
yeah,
also, if I can, just real quick,
there's
Elliot, it's what's going on here is, there's going to be a particularist situation, and when we get from the particularist situation to the method, it's not going to be. It's going to be in virtue of the fact that we had knowledge, and we're just describing how we had it in the first place.
yeah, and like part of this might reduce to like a difference in justificate like a priori versus a posteriori justification. And I'd actually have to think about that in terms of like, for in terms of what I would call knowledge. Because I don't think they're the same things. I think that whatever it is that you take, right, is whatever it is that you take fundamentally in order to kind of construct your epistemology or your account of epistemology. I don't think that that's the same category of belief as like the products of it. And what I call that, right? Even like if I call it knowledge, I, I still don't mean knowledge in the same sense, right, as the knowledge that's produced by it, because maybe that's a distinction between a priori versus a posteriori. I'd have to think about that. I yeah, I would definitely have to think about that a little bit more. But if it's the case that you when I asked you like how it is that like or in virtue of what you call it knowledge that like God has revealed himself through like scripture and like to you personally, you said, well, if God has done these things then I can know it. But I don't see how that answers the question, right? Because the entire question is, how do you know that God has in fact done those things? And that's the justification for that claim is what I'd be
How is
interested in
Well, I just
knowing.
don't see how that's not
If you
repeating
think,
the question, though.
I guess maybe I don't see how your answer was responsive to my question. Maybe that's a better way to put it, because like really what I was asking for is an articulation of the justification for that claim, right?
The
Because
the
that claim
justification
that
the justification for the claim is the object of knowledge.
Yeah, but Elliot, also, like, would you ask the same question to any person who says they're starting with some particularist account? Would you say, well, what's the justification for the fact that you have knowledge?
it depends. Potentially I would not, right? And there are some things that I don't feel that again, like my own mental states. I don't try to give justification for my own mental states or for the things that I might consider properly basic beliefs to hold. Like it's just I'm not interested in like trying to prove those to other people or giving
Well, there we
arguments for them.
go.
Well, yeah, but like so I wouldn't have an argument for it,
That's the
right?
whole
But like
point.
if you're saying so, do you? Okay, so maybe I should ask that. Do you think that it's possible to make like a persuasive argument for the existence of God? Like, do you think that like tag or something or any similar kind of argument works?
Persuasive is going to be person dependent, but go ahead, Jimmy.
Sure. Yeah. Even by your own lights, right?
Well, I think to someone who's and I'm not trying to be rude. Don't take this wrong. I'm not trying to be condescending, but I think if you go back and listen to this conversation, you really pay attention, you've already heard a really great argument for Christianity, right? It's that, like, look, Eliot as a person doesn't have justification for his beliefs about being an unbeliever, for his beliefs about being able to know things apart from God. We just saw that, like, your system is dead out of the water, my brother. Like, you want us to ask things and
But that
postulate things and deliberate and do all sorts of actions that presuppose knowledge, whatever you take the end result conclusion about that to be. It's not an equivocation,
it just
right?
doesn't. That's a
In order
complete
to
non
get to
sequitur.
knowledge.
Look, you would need to admit that that's it, whether you think I have good epistemic faculties or not. And again, and well, a couple of points have to be made. Right. First of
How?
all, is that
I've
my
never,
solution to the problem of criterion is not contingent on atheists. There are atheists who
I've
give all kinds
never
of answers.
I'm
Like,
sorry. I just never understood how someone can, uh, on a defeated foundation for making claims, start pretending to tell me what follows from certain premises, right? Like, you're not in a position to know that on your epistemology. If you want to use mine, we can,
yeah, we
right?
we
But
just
then we're
disagreed
playing
on
by my
whether or not
rules.
it's. We just disagreed on whether it's been defeated, right? Like, I don't think it's been defeated. I just think you're
Okay.
equivocating
Well, no,
with
no. Wait.
knowledge.
You just said even if it's been defeated,
Yeah.
yours doesn't follow, right? So you didn't need to. That was irrelevant to say if you don't think it's been defeated, right? If it
No,
hasn't been if it
it
has been
was relevant
defeated,
to say because I'm saying that, like, from my position, it's a non sequitur, but also non
okay.
sequitur from your position because unless you have some radically proprietary notion of like logical entailment, even if you did think that like I had the wrong answer to the problem of the criterion, it's still not like nothing of what you just said would follow from that. It wouldn't follow that every other element of my worldview, including atheism, was false. It wouldn't follow that every other element of your worldview is true. Like again, like what on earth kind of logical entailment do you imagine would actually create that kind of implication from like the mere fact that on your belief, I have a bad answer to the problem of the criterion?
Well, on my knowledge that you don't, it would just follow that God exists, right?
How? Follow how? Like what inference rule?
It's not an inference. Every fact in reality entails that God exists.
Wait, okay, so you do have a radically proprietary. What do you think it means for something to follow from something else?
It's not a proprietary view of logic. It has to do with evidence, right? So if all things are created in this universe, so all the facts about your mental states, if the fact that Eliot gets epistemology wrong is a created fact, it just follows by definition that it's there because God made it there.
When on earth would that be? Like, was it established that that was created? When not, you didn't even try to establish that that's a created
It's
fact. You
established
just made
according
that.
to whose epistemology?
You
Yours.
didn't establish, as far as I could hear, according to anyone's. You made the claim, but like you're just saying that like you said that what follows from me, on your view, having a bad answer to the problem of the criterion. Because I said that I tend to
Yes.
lean toward Methodism, right? And
Yep.
I could be persuaded that Methodism is wrong. I don't think that that's necessarily the strongest case I've
I,
heard against it, but it is something
I,
that needs to be grappled with. I think every answer to the problem of the criterion needs to be grappled with. But like, let's just imagine that yeah, if I could just finish the thought, like, let's just imagine that like I did have a totally wrong answer to the problem of criterion. Uh, you would need to show how that entails that like that has anything to say about the rest of my epistemology besides the problem of the criterion, and B, how even if my epistemology was bad, that would validate yours. And you said you couldn't produce an inference to that, but you keep saying this word that it follows. And so if you can't produce the inference, but you just keep saying it follows, then yeah, I'm going to accuse you of having a radically proprietary notion of what it means for something to follow from something else.
yeah, I don't think an entailment is an inference. An inference is something that goes on in the mind. An entailment is a logical relation between two facts. When you infer something, the goal is to follow entailment relations between facts, but the entailment relation is not identical to your inferences.
I
But
would agree.
regardless, look,
But what's the
yeah,
inference?
but regardless, look, the problem is that on my view, right, everything is created.
That's precisely the view that
So
you're asked. Like, look, the existence of the creator God and the fact that everything is created
again,
is just part of the thing that's like in question, right? So, like saying that like it like using it to say it follows is just question begging.
broken.
The machine I use on the carpet, which I come and pick him up.
Oh, he's coming.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
later, maybe by 8, I don't know. So he come and pick him up. I'll leave right there by the bed.
I'll watch it. Thank you. Adios. Hasta mañana.
Sounded like you had a conversation going there, but
Yeah, sorry, I'm
yeah,
at
no,
work. Sorry about that.
it's fine. I was like, all I was saying was that like I might say something like wait, how do you know that everything was created by God? And your answer, it sounds like it's just going to be like, well, Elliot had a bad answer to the problem of the criterion. And then again, I'm going to say, well, how does it follow that because
No,
Elliot
you
had a
see,
bad answer?
no. The purpose of pointing out problems with your epistemology is to say that you have no defense, you have no justification for your unbelief, right? In other words, it's obvious that Christianity is true, and the only
How does
reason
that follow?
Elliot doesn't accept that is because he has a faulty epistemology, which is easy to see, right? But if you're asking me
I'm,
how I know, which is not the same question as how I make an argument to Elliot that this is the case, but if you're asking me how I know that God exists or something like that, then the answer that things are created or that it's been revealed to me are part of the same metaphysical system, right? The whole point of view that we're putting forward is that God has created humans. Part of the constitution of a human being, part of what it means to be a human, is to know God. That's just the way He's made us. You can ask questions about like what it means to know, but I don't think that's not really a problem. That's just a clarifying question, and it's not something that you can't ask of any epistemology. I don't think it's really relevant, right? Like whether you're going to say it's warranted belief or justified true belief or whatever you think it is,
yeah, like so
it's whatever that is.
you just chained a bunch of non sequiturs together, and then
Well, you're
kind of
making
like
the claim
unveiled
that
it.
they're non sequiturs.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that they're non sequiturs, right? Because they don't imply or entail, or there's no line of inference that you've identified or that you've been willing to identify that leads from one claim to the next, right? It's like if you could show any kind of inference, any kind of like line of inference from the postulate that Eliot has the wrong answer to the problem of the criterion, right? Like let's just grant that for the sake of argument, right? Let's just say that like I have a bad answer to the problem of the criterion.
Okay,
What you would need to do is like derive any of the things that you said like from that in order to say like it follows from that. And you can't like just repeating the claim or just repeating the other claims you believe that are also in question is not going to be fruitful.
I don't understand what you're saying by that, right? So if you ask me, hey, Jimmy, why do you believe that this orange is juicy? I would say, well, because I ate it. Oh, but Jimmy, that doesn't provide me a derivation of why this orange is in fact juicy.
Look,
Okay, well, you can bite the orange yourself, or you can sit there and ask for arguments, but that's to miss the point of the worldview that I'm presenting, right? In the worldview I'm presenting, God has revealed Himself. He's created things so that it's rather clear that He's here and providentially ruling over the world. That His Son died on the cross. If you've read the scriptures, right? The problem is with people's faulty responses
okay,
to
like
that truth.
let's just imagine that I asked a Christian what the solution is to the problem of the criterion.
Yeah,
And the Christian had a bad answer by your lights. Would that imply anything about the falsity of the or truth of the Christian worldview?
I don't think so because I think that the Christian in question would have the answer. He would be working with the answer, just like the unbeliever does. He would just have a faulty account of what he in fact knows.
Okay, so you agree then that even an account that you think is faulty doesn't falsify the worldview of the person who made it, right?
No, that by itself does not know.
Okay, so then I don't want to hear you had a bad answer to the problem of the criterion when I ask you for a justification for the claims you're making about my worldview. Because even if you do think my account was faulty, it's just by your own admission not going to follow anything about the truth or falsity of my worldview.
Right, but the difference is that in this situation, the Christian has the answer to the problem, right?
So you
So
say.
even though he has a faulty answer, he still also has the answer, and that's the difference, right?
So you will. That's precisely what's in question, right? But like that would just be you repeating, something that I would only believe if I were already a Christian. So it would just be you begging the question, right? Which doesn't
I
mean
don't
that
think
you're wrong.
it's not begging
It just means that.
it's not
Well,
begging the
like,
question
look,
to clarify why I think there's a difference between
I would.
you and the example.
Yeah, like you obviously think the difference is that the person in the example has a correct worldview and that I don't. But the point is that,
Right.
like in both cases, we both articulated, an answer to an epistemic problem that you found lacking. And
Right.
based on the strength of that alone, unless you just have a blatant double standard, on the strength of that alone, you're not going to be able to make any
I
pronouncements about.
right, and I just clarified that it's not a double standard
Yeah.
because the difference is, in the case of the Christian, while he has a faulty answer to the problem, he also accepts the answer to the problem. You reject the answer to the problem. That is that is all the difference in the world, friend.
Well, so you would just need to show that you have the quote unquote correct answer to the problem, which is precisely what's in question, right? And if
Sure.
you could make
So
that would be part of your inferential task, right? So you might say, well, actually, like maybe the next time that I ask you for the actual inference in virtue of which it follows that like my worldview is false from my giving a Methodist answer to the problem of the criterion, you might bring that up, but that would just be part of the inference that I've been asking you to produce.
What do you take an inference to be, Elliot? What's the definition you're working with for inference?
I mean, just going to be some kind of like argument or like chain of like inference rules and propositions that lead to the conclusion that I'm after, that you're trying to make. So you might say, have some kind of inductive case or some kind of abductive case or deductive case uh, that leads from the one claim, because you're saying one claim follows from the other. Right. So you're saying it follows from me having a particular account of epistemology that atheism is false, or So like I would just like to
I said it
see
entails.
the chain of reasoning that goes
Okay.
there. And I don't care if it's
Real quick.
if it's a logical entailment, or if you have some kind of like inductive probabilistic case or something. I'd settle for anything.
Do you want to
Okay.
know what inference undermines atheism?
No, I want to know
Real
what.
quick. Wait. I just want to clarify that. Like, okay, so I've been working with the understanding that like uh, you were not treating follows as the same thing as like an argument. But if when I said entailed, I'm talking about a logical relation between certain facts. That doesn't mean that someone needs some kind of argument about the fact to reach what is entailed. It could just be the case that the person is acquainted with the fact and it evidences what it entails, right? So that was the point. That's a really good clarification for why the request for inference is a bit irrelevant, right? Because
Well,
you already
don't
have
you
the
think?
evidence without inference,
What do you think evidence is?
something that supports your belief, something that gives you
Inferent,
reason
like
to believe what you believe.
yeah, like again, you're just gonna like we're just shifting the inference from the word entail or follows to the word evidence. But evidence itself is going to be like the standard usage is going to be something that raises the probability of a conclusion being true. And I would just love to know how exactly, like what evidence you think does that. If you're using my stance on uh, on the problem of the criterion in order to get you to the conclusion that like atheism is falsified,
Yeah,
because those propositions are not identical.
because any object of thought raises the probability of God's existence by one.
so what you're saying is that literally, even if I had just said like I'm eating a banana, right,
Yes.
that
Yep.
you would be making the exact same claim as if
Yep.
I had given an answer to the problem of the
Right.
criteria that you don't like. Okay, are
Right.
you able to give okay? So that clarifies. That's very helpful. Thank you. I again, I think that's really a proprietary usage of of these terms, I guess I would just ask, like, can you demonstrate the logical relationship between me eating a banana and God existing, without just making the claim that, or like, if I ask you to demonstrate it, will you just end up making the claim that, like, well, God
Yeah.
created the banana and all facts, so therefore.
Right. Right. So if it were not the case that this entails God exists, right, or that this raises the probability by one, then Eliot would have a forthcoming justification for that fact. Eliot does not have a forthcoming justification for that fact. Therefore, it is the case that these objects of thought raise the probability of God by one.
Where did you get premise one from?
That's just to state the inverse of what you're asking me to demonstrate, right? You're asking me to demonstrate that some object of thought raises the probability of God by one, right?
And you're just basically going to state, you just basically
But that's not the
I
case.
think you just kind of, yeah. So, like, I wouldn't believe unless I already accepted the conclusion. So that it seems like that is just restating the claim in a longer, like, with
I
more
don't understand
words,
why
right?
you would need to believe. I don't understand why you need to believe the claim, or rather, I don't understand why you'd have to affirm the claim in order to make the argument. Seems to me like
why
whether or not you're openly
why would I
convinced
accept?
is better.
Yeah, why would I accept the premise that, if God didn't create the banana, then Elliot would have a justification for it? Why would I accept that premise if unless I actually already believe the conclusion that it works towards?
Yeah, because those are the only alternatives, right? Um, either the objects of thought that we have are what they are accessible to the mind, are knowable in virtue of God's revelation, or they are known because you have some kind of alternative justification. So if it's not the case that objects of thought are known through God consciousness and therefore raise the probability of God by one, then you must have some kind of alternative way of knowing them. But as we just saw, you don't.
That doesn't follow at all, right? So first of all, I would say that I do. But second of all, I just might not be aware, right? It could be that in a non-God world, I'm suppressing the truth of how I know about bananas, right? You haven't invalidated any of those possibilities, right? It could be that actually it's not even knowledge in the first place,
Oh,
right? And that I
so
just happen to be accidentally acquainted.
right. So you know uh, that knowledge is possible without knowing that it's possible. You know that these things
No,
are knowable without any account for knowing that they're knowable.
I know that they're knowable without it. I'd have to think about
Just
that.
take an
That
object of
wasn't
thought, right? So
either.
you used a
Yeah,
banana, right? You used a banana earlier. So you think that you can know things about a banana without knowing that it's possible to know things about a banana.
that you can know things about the banana without knowing that it's possible. No, implicitly you'd have to know that it's possible. Well,
Right,
actually, yeah, actually, I
right.
think you. Sorry, I just actually disagree. I think that that you might not even know about about your own knowledge, right? So I think you can have knowledge without even necessarily knowing that
Wait,
it is
wait. So
knowledge or what knowledge is.
you deny the KK principle?
Yeah, I do deny KK.
Whoa.
Yeah, well, last I heard, that was like the most common position amongst, like, epistemologists. Maybe that's
So
changed in the last couple of years, but it's not like a fringe position.
Well,
But
right. So
we're
if you just don't know,
is it okay if I just, yeah, like, is it okay if I just focus on the entailment you were supposed to produce? Because I'm happy to talk about KK, but, like, I really want to
well,
hammer this
it's
point
relevant.
home.
Well, it's relevant,
All
right? So
right.
if you didn't know how you knew, then you wouldn't be in a position to know that it's something other than the Christian God.
uh, if I didn't know how I knew, then I wouldn't. Actually, I don't even think that follows, right? Because it could be the case that I know that, like, I know enough to know there's, like, certain ways that I don't know without knowing specifically which way I do know, right? So it could be the
Yeah,
case that, like, I
but
can
that would
still see that
be
there's, yeah. So
just to
that would
know that
falsify
it's
that
not
claim.
God. But that would be just to know that it's not God, right? The
Yeah,
point is
but
you
that would.
either
Like,
right.
do you
So you
understand
just
the difference between knowing? Yeah, between knowing that it's not God and knowing what it is. Like, do you understand how like I could know that it's not God without knowing what it actually is, but I could just know that it's like maybe not anything. It's like something outside of the category of like you know pre-existent ase mind or something like that. It'd be
Uh,
like
I don't. I don't know. I don't see how
like,
you
it'd
could,
be
but
like saying I don't know what I'm standing on because I'm blindfolded, but I do know it's not a married bachelor, right? Like that's a
yeah, yeah.
perfectly like rational position to be in, right? So it could be the case that like even though I
Uh,
know what it's not.
no, I don't think that's true, right? So what's being said here is I don't know anything about what I'm standing on, right? That would be the denial of the KK principles. I don't have knowledge about what I'm standing on, but also what I'm standing on, I know it isn't God, right? So, or like, I know it
No,
isn't
I don't think that's what. Yeah, we would disagree on that, right? Because like I think it's perfectly acceptable on KK to say like, well, I can, you're kind of creating a false binary between like either you like uh, have knowledge that like perfectly justifies another object of knowledge, or you just know nothing about it, right? Or you can't say anything about it. And I can say, I might be able to say something like, in virtue of what is like, are you, in virtue of what are you like being suspended over a bridge? And it's like, well, I know it's not like a hexagonal triangle.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know what
So,
it is. It could be
but to
something
know that
else.
it's, to know that it's not a hexagonal triangle, you'd have to know what it can be in order for it to be something other than a hexagonal triangle.
But I actually don't know what it is, right? That's that's the point,
Well,
right? Is
I
that
don't know how
actually
you're going to know, I don't know how you're going to know what it can be without knowing what it is, but one step removed from that, right? In order to
I
know
just gave
that
an
it's not
example.
a, in order to know that it's not a hexagonal triangle, you have to know what sort of things it can be instead.
um, yeah, but that's not the same as knowing what it is.
Great.
That's the only
Okay. Now,
point
how
there.
do you know what it can be instead without knowing what it actually is?
Yeah, that's just going to be an appeal to some axiom about like geometric modality.
Yeah. How do you know that?
Yeah, so that's just going to be like some either something you would call a priori knowledge or an axiom or something like that, for which there's no
And
prior justification.
and now we're back to my original point at the very
Yeah.
beginning of the
This is
conversation.
subjectivism.
Yeah, well, that's not subjective. I mean, that doesn't actually follow that it's subjectivism, right? The fact that
Sure.
there's not
Sure.
an
Dan. You have
articulable
no justification.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say it's unjust.
that
I'm just
doesn't
gonna say it's
follow.
unjustified.
That's not what
That was my whole
subjectivism is,
right, but that was my whole
right?
point. That was my whole point at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
When we
Well,
dig
yeah,
deep enough,
yeah. I
we're
argue
always
that.
gonna keep arriving back here.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, you don't. So, like, somebody who just says, like, looks at the piano axioms or something and says, "I just don't agree with you." You can't justify it to, and that's like trivially easy to stipulate. Like that's something that I stipulated all along. I wouldn't. There's all kinds of things that I wouldn't try to argue for. Somebody who just disagrees with me about whether there can be hexagonal triangles. That's just the end of the conversation, right? I'm not going to
For
be like,
you.
well, here's like, it's the end of the conversation in principle, right? Because
No,
there
for,
is
for you.
nothing. There is no deeper. Well, maybe you think you could persuade that person by just saying God has revealed to you that there can't be hexagonal triangles or something. I doubt you'd have much more success with that particular strategy. But
No,
my whole
Wait,
oh,
do you?
point is
I
that,
agree.
like,
Wait,
yeah, but
Elliot,
like,
real quick. I agree with you. I don't think that. I don't think that's a good strategy.
okay, good, yeah. But like, remember, you said that you had an argument, right? And you said that that it followed from me having a bad answer to the problem of the criterion that the Christian God existed. And then when probed,
Yes.
you admitted that actually it wasn't that it followed from me having a bad answer to the problem of the criterion. It was that it followed from me literally saying anything, including that I'm eating a banana, that the Christian God existed, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm not claiming that like the geometric axioms follow from something, but you're actually claiming that that it follows from me saying I have eaten a banana or something like that, that the Christian God exists. But like I've been asking for like a half hour and you still haven't shown the implication or the evidential reasoning beyond just restating the claim that the Christian God created everything. And that's, I think, the fundamental problem so far is that we still don't know what you think it means to say it follows, from me eating a banana the Christian God exists because you haven't actually made that link.
Elliot, my friend, it's like you suffered amnesia of what we just went over, right? So have a nice
Okay.
night. If we just went over was that in order to know that it's possibly something other than the Christian God, in virtue of which you know what you know, okay,
What do you think?
you'd have
What
to act. You'd have to know that thing in virtue of which you know what you know. And you said, well, it could just be an axiom, right? And then you through various other words admitted, yeah, that's just my preference. I just believe that because I want to believe that. Okay, well, so then that's the difference between our epistemologies, and I take that to be the great evidence of Christianity, or argument, if you will, in this conversation, right? If you want to be an
that does
unbeliever, you have to settle for being an unjustified, arbitrary person.
that
On the
okay?
alternative, you can be rational, you can be a Christian, and you can have these reasons for the things that you believe.
Those aren't you haven't given any reasons. You haven't given any justifications. You've just repeated the claim, right? Like if you and I'm not trying to persuade you of the things that I consider to be fundamental, right? It's like I'm not engaged
You're
in the
not
project
addressing
of like
anything that I just said.
trying. Well, I am, right, because you're saying that like on the one hand there's me who has unjustified axioms, which I do. I'm a foundationalist, so that's something that I do have, and you're saying that that somehow falsifies atheism, but then you don't have any justification for like the many like theologically complex claims you've made other than to just repeat them or to point at me and say because you have this problem that means that or what you claim is a problem. I don't think it's a problem, but because on your lights you have this problem, it just follows magically that your worldview is true. And I keep pointing out, and I don't think you've responded to this, that even if I did have that problem, it wouldn't follow that your worldview were true, right? It could be the case, and I
So
got you because you admitted that a Christian could give a bad answer on epistemology, and that wouldn't actually falsify the Christian worldview, right? I could go and I could ask a Christian somewhere to like solve the ship of Theseus, like thought experiment or Zeno's paradox or something, right? And they can't do it. Ooh, boom. Christianity is falsified. No one would take me seriously if I said that. And I couldn't go around claiming that, like, look, if you're a Christian, then it just follows that, Christianity is false and atheism is true. Because a Christian that I talked to had a really unsatisfactory answer to, some epistemic puzzle or like philosophical quandary. That just doesn't follow. There's atheists who disagree with me, right? There's atheists who don't take the Methodist approach to the problem of the criterion. And nothing about atheism entails my approach to the problem of the criterion. So even if you think it's like unsatisfactory, you still need to go and actually show that something wrong with atheism. Instead, you're just making these wild leaps of logic that I've been asking you to create a bridge, and you're not making that bridge. You're just repeating the claim that one follows from the other when it doesn't follow in
at
any
no
normal
point
sense.
at no point in this conversation have I said God exists, God exists, God exists, or anything like this. I have no idea what you're talking about when you say
Well,
I've
you
repeated the
keep
claim.
making claims about what
Um,
God has revealed,
I've
which just
I've
implies
had
that we're
to I've been forced to repeat points repeatedly because you seem to forget them right after they're made. But I don't know what repeat. Have a good night. I don't know what repeated claim you think I'm making. Right? I explained clearly that. So go back a little bit in the conversation. Right? I explained clearly that there's a difference between the question how one would argue to Eliot that it's that the motivation for his unbelief has really nothing to do with lack of evidence for God or that you don't have an argument or anything like that. It really just has to do with the fact that God is obvious and you don't have good reasons um, to reject him. It comes down to you're not in the mood to do it, right? Uh, but if you're asking me how I know in terms of Christian epistemology, not how I demonstrate it to you, but how I know, how anyone can know, right, is the fact that God has created the universe, he's revealed himself in it, he has made it very clear in his word how this all works, right? Part of it is like I'm presupposing we've had conversations before, so I know you know something of my view, right? So I've already clarified how I would know, right? The argument here has been, look, if you take the unbelieving approach to this, if you say it's possible or it's rational or whatever you want, however you wish to put it, right? It's okay, it's legitimate, it's proper not to be a Christian believer, right? There's no justification for that. It's just wishful thinking. And yes, people can say, I choose today to be the King of England, and this television screen here is going to be my squire. You can do that. That's very sad. We have the God given right to do that. But I just prefer my beliefs to line up with the truth, right? I think it would benefit you too. I think you're really smarter than a lot of what's going on in your epistemology. But I think that's a great argument. It's a fantastic argument to say, look, outside of Christianity, this is what Eliot has to offer. Yeah, and then we look at what Christianity has to offer. Yeah, and it's much better. Like there's a big difference there.
I don't see any difference whatsoever, right? So I said that I'm a foundationalist, and I said that I start my reasoning starts from axioms, right? It seems like your reasoning starts from something you don't call it an axiom, right? But you just call it like you just say that your reasoning starts from like the revelation of God, right? But of course, when asked to produce any evidence or justify this claim, you're just going to repeat the claim, or maybe in the same words or different words, right? And yes, you have repeated the claim that the Christian God exists because you've been repeatedly making claims about what he's been doing, which would just contain the proposition that he exists, right? So like if that's all that you have to offer, then I don't see why the sword you're swinging isn't
Why
just
do we?
chopping your head off too.
I just think that you're not addressing the position, right? So why would I need to demonstrate that God exists if God has already revealed himself to everyone quite clearly? Wouldn't that be kind of silly to be like, okay, we've all tasted an orange and we all know it tastes really good, but I'm not going to accept that it's tasty until you've given me some kind of sophisticated deduction that it's like, that's
Um,
preposterous.
Well,
also
look, if you
Elliot.
just aren't
Also,
interested in the well, it's okay if I just respond to him real quick. Like, if you're just
sure,
not
sure.
interested in the project of like demonstration, then if like you should have just said, "I don't have an argument for you" when I asked you for an argument. But instead, you just gave like a terrible argument. You were just
You're,
like,
you're,
"Well,
you're,
premise one,
you're missing the
if
point. You're missing the point.
Yeah,
You
Elliot, and
said,
also,
you said,
oh, sorry,
but I'm
go ahead.
asking for demonstration. Okay. Right. Well, why would it need to be demonstrated? It's not an answer to that question to say, well, maybe you're not in this enterprise. Irrelevant, right? That's not the question I asked. The question I asked is, why would someone need to demonstrate it? The only reason you'd ask that
well,
question is if you're begging the question against my position.
look, if it's the case that I like, so I don't believe what you are saying, right? And if you think that like, well, I actually do believe it, that we just like disagree about. I'm not gonna again. I'll be begging the question if I tried to make an argument that I don't believe the Christian God exists, right? Because like that might end up begging the question. But I don't. Again, I don't argue about my mental states with people, right? Someone who tells me that they know my mental states better than me, I just say, okay, good luck with that, right? So I'm not. It's not begging the question for me to say, I don't believe this claim. Do you have an argument for it, right? And so
It
you,
is begging the
if you
question to
think
say you don't believe it, because
uh,
that's the
uh,
contention.
well, yeah, but I'm not making it. I'm not arguing with you about it, right? I'm not saying that. I'm not working the conclusion of an argument into its
So
premise because
you
I'm not
mean
even
you're
making
not
it.
in the enterprise of demonstrating your claims?
That claim, no, I'm absolutely
Okay.
not.
Okay,
And there's
can I
several
make
other
a comment?
claims
Can I
as
make a
well.
comment here,
But if you're in the
Elliot?
well, yeah, but is it okay if I just finish my response real quick? Yeah, but if you are in the enterprise of making arguments for claims about God, then I would have hoped to hear a better argument than the one you ended up producing. Because again, when I didn't say you had to have an argument. I asked if you did have one, and you said, well, and then you gave this whole premise one. If if God didn't exist, Eliot would have or Eliot would have um, a justification for like eating uh, a banana, right? What on earth kind of premise is that? Like, premise two, LA doesn't, therefore God exists. Like, that's a terrible argument. And no one held
Well,
a
that
gun
wasn't
to
the
your head and
argument.
made you
Come on.
give.
Come on,
No,
Laddie.
that was the
That's a
argument.
little.
Oh,
That's a
okay.
little
All right.
Okay,
sensitive. Go
Elliot,
ahead,
can I,
Truthy.
yeah, I just
I
want to
say
make
run
this
the
comment.
replay because
Because
that was your argument. But yeah, go ahead,
look,
Truth.
look, I mean, the point here is that you keep saying you haven't given any evidence or you haven't shown any inferences, but of course, throughout this entire conversation, he's given you information that indicates whether his, belief is true or valid. He's given you facts, right? Things that from his view are known to be true, right? And he's given you his understanding of what a fact is and why it's true. You just reject all of it. So it's not that he hasn't offered these things. Now, in terms of an argument, right? He's giving you it's not like he made some formal argument and then obviously we can, but it's going to come down to arguing about soundness like these things always do. So I think it's just disingenuous to say no evidence or facts or notions of truth haven't been proffered. Of course they have.
But those are claims. Like he hasn't given evidence, right? Because again, evidence is just going to be um, that same kind of like, inferential process I was talking about earlier, right? Like that's what's going to actually establish evidence and contextualize it as raising the probability of his
No.
conclusion. Yeah, of course, he's made claims.
Who says those are
I
the rules for evidence?
Yeah, Elliot, evidence is simply facts or information that's going to indicate whether a belief is true.
yeah. What
Right.
do you think
We
it means
just
for a
agreed
fact? What
earlier
do you
that.
think it means for a fact to indicate that a belief is true?
Well, no, we can just go back to the definition that you seem to forget already, right? You gave the definition earlier that evidence is just some fact that raises the probability of your belief by some relevant percentage, right? So, look, I've given plenty of examples that would do that for God. The problem is you interpret those facts differently because you have a different epistemology. And so the issue is if your epistemology is faulty, then the interpretation of those facts as being not God supporting falls to the wayside, right? You didn't need
Okay.
to. Go ahead.
Is there a way for me to not have a God-based epistemology and see the evidential value of your evidence?
No, that's the equivalent of saying, can I have an epistemology that doesn't appreciate the way evidence works and still appreciate evidence?
Okay, so I think that again, like it's not only true. It's not only true that you do have a very proprietary definition, right? Because you've baked God into the definition of or belief in God into the definition of evidence. But it just seems to be the case that like in doing so, you've undercut the very notion of evidence in the first place. You just defined evidence, right, in such a way that the only way that one could even use evidence, or only way that one would ever understand the evidence you present is that they just agree with you already, which just misses the entire point of evidence. And I think that's the point that I've been making.
I don't agree that. First of all, I don't think that someone's agreement or disagreement about a subject is relevant to whether or not you've produced evidence. You can produce evidence for people who agree, disagree, or have reservations about a belief. It's really quite irrelevant what they believe. But because again, evidence is just a property of the fact you're producing, whether it supports belief, whether it raises the probability of the relevant belief. The other issue, though, is just that I don't see the argument that this view of God, wherein his creational activity, the fact that this Christian God is, it's his plan and his way of working the universe that makes everything what it is, and so you've got to know him to know how the universe is working, right? I don't see how that view, which controls how one would interpret evidence, makes the definition of evidence problematic.
It makes the definition of evidence for that view problematic, right? You've just defined that view out of the purview of the kind of thing that you could ever introduce evidence for. And you just defined that, and you've defined evidence away in a very similar manner. So, like, it seems to me like you should just say, "Oh yeah, like this is my position. I don't have evidence for that view, and everything that I call evidence is just going to be, it's just literally. It seems like according to you, literally every fact is just going to be evidence for God. So you're just going
Can
to
you
like
rephrase?
look around.
Can you rephrase that? I don't understand what you're saying is the definitional problem there.
Well, yeah, it just seems like if that's your definition of evidence, right, then you've just kind of like defined that claim out of the category of things that you could ever have evidence for,
So
right?
if
Because
what
that's not
is
something
the
that's even going to be adjudicable.
why does it become a what? Why would some things raising the probability for belief in God fail to exist if our definition of evidence is that some fact raises the probability of a belief.
No,
And
you're
one cannot rightly interpret evidence without knowledge of God.
yeah. So it just seems like if we use evidence, right, to adjudicate like disputes or to solve problems, right, to answer questions that we have about whatever, like any epistemic or philosophical uh, question or disagreement, or in the case of like a debate, right, or case of like a dialectic, whatever is like the object of dispute. So if you're saying that like, well, I'm just the way that I define evidence, um, only someone who believes the conclusion for which there's supposed to be evidence in the first place can understand evidence. And then every single fact is just going to be evidence that entails that conclusion. It just
That's not
seems
what
like,
I said. That's not what I
okay, so
said,
you,
right? So what I said was that someone would not be in a position to interpret evidence unless they knew God, right? So if you have someone who is saying they don't know God, there's a physicalist explanation for epistemology, so on and so forth. And presumably they're a naturalist, right? In your case, you're a foundationalist. So you're putting together all these little doctrines of epistemology into some kind of system. Then presumably they've got some really bad inconsistencies in their system, because all the while they use knowledge of God to interpret evidence in favor of some things, they're also going to subject themselves to errors when they see evidence for God, and that rejecting him is part of their physicalism, right? But that doesn't
yeah.
mean that a person, I don't see how that would remotely involve a person not having evidence for uh, their belief in God.
Well, but the way you've defined evidence is that every single fact is evidence of the Christian God. And because you don't, and you've inoculated yourself from ever having to demonstrate that claim by just saying that, like, well, in order to appreciate that definition, you just have to accept the truth of that claim,
No, I
right?
never
And
said
so,
anything like that.
well,
I never said
okay,
anything
do
like
you think,
that.
or
I presented various artifacts that would constitute evidence on my view, because it was asked of me what would constitute evidence. What are things that evidence God, right? I'm not
well, you
trying to
said every
answer the
fact though.
question. I'm not trying to answer the question, what's the demonstration that Christianity is true, by saying this over here evidences God, right? It seems like you're trading my answers for different questions.
Yeah. So again, if it like, do you, okay, let's ask you, is it, do you think that there's evidence that Christianity is true?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Can you give like, is it going to end up being the case that every single fact is evidence of Christianity being true?
Oh, I was going to use your. I was going to say you have a really nice looking beard, so that would be there's something that evidences God.
Okay. Are you able to explain or demonstrate how my beard is evidence for the truth of Christianity?
Yeah, so I'll just use the same ad hominem argument that, like, look, in adjudicating whether the beard can be evidence for or not evidence for God, right? Whether it can be anything other than evidence for God, we're going to need justification for a belief that it can be something else. And in order for that belief to be justified, we need to know that it is something else, or at least have an example of something that is something else, right? And so at that
Okay.
point, we're going to have hard evidence to the contrary.
So what's your argument or evidence for your first premise?
What's the argument that if you, in order to adjudicate whether it can be anything other than evidence for God, you need to know that you need to know that you need to have an example or something like that?
I think in the first time that you said it, you said that you would need to have like justification for, like, we were talking about a banana. So you were saying that, like, or the first time you ran this, you said that if the Christian God didn't like if this weren't evidence for the Christian God, then Elliot would have justification for the banana.
Yeah, well, no. What I said was Elliot would have justification for his belief that things are knowable, like bananas,
Okay,
apart from the
yeah.
Christian God.
Okay, so that's a very interesting thing. If the Christian God didn't exist, then Elliot would have justification for his belief that things aren't bananas. And when you say justification, do you accept circular or question begging justifications, or do you
No,
require
you'd
inferential
have,
justifications?
that's not quite right? You'd have justification for the belief that you know things apart from the Christian God, like bananas.
Okay, and
Bananas would be an
and when you
example.
say okay, and when you say justification, do you accept? Are you including circular justifications, or does it have to be a non-circular justification?
It depends. I think if it's logically circular, it's going to be a problem, but I don't have a problem with epistemic circularity.
What do you think is the difference?
Logical circularity is when someone makes a chain of inference and they repeat a premise as its own conclusion. And epistemic circularity is when you have some kind of source of knowledge that provides instances of evidence of its own veracity. So, like,
Okay.
Like truth,
um,
for instance. Truth would be example. Like,
So what do you do
yeah.
if like the claim that like a particular entity is the source of knowledge is the claim that's in question? Wouldn't that be both epistemically and logically circular?
can you say that one more time?
I said so. Let's imagine that the claim, right, that a particular entity is the source of um, your epistemology is precisely the claim that's in question. Wouldn't that be both logically and epistemically circular?
I don't see how it would be logically circular. Real quick, I'm not sure. This might be taking us really far afield of premise one of the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just what I'm anticipating is the fact that like if I were to ask you for like you're talking about whether or not I have a justification for the idea that I can have bananas. And I'm just trying to get a sense of like what kinds of justifications you accept. Because when I turn the question back on you, and I find this in my discussions with the precepts, I all of a sudden find out that all that circular justifications are allowed under proprietary rules, or only like if they invoke God or something like that. And I want to make
I
sure I
would
call that
say,
out.
yeah, I would say the rules for justification here are just that you don't break them.
What?
If it doesn't violate one of your own epistemic rules, then it's fine.
Well, it might be the case that like I don't view it as justification, but you would view it as justification, right?
I don't see how, on my view, you could have justification for the belief that it's possible to know things without God.
Maybe it's circular, and maybe on my view, like it's circular, but like I don't, I give a circular justification, but I think that that's problematic. But on
When
your
you
view,
say
Can you give
you
me an example?
justification, wait. When he says justification, does he just mean his own like subjective standard for being convinced, or what is he actually referring to?
that's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
So your subjective standard for being convinced is the justification.
No, I don't think it needs to be that, right? I'm just taking whatever you take justification, right? Presumably you have some kind of justification is some category of facts which
Yeah, but it's your
when
premise, so I want to know what you think justification
Because
is
if
in
you're
your premise.
talking about logic, then if you're evaluating the truth, the
I
validity of
clarified
like a
that.
presupposition, that's just principle of explosion. You can't do that. So then,
Part of
aside
why
from
I'm
that,
really confused. Part of why I'm really confused is I already answered that question, right? So you asked me what I think, what would count as justification, and I'm
no, I'm
saying
asking
whatever
Elliot.
you think
I'm asking Elliot. Yeah,
Oh, no,
I'm.
and I'm responding to him too. I'm
Oh,
responding to him
okay.
too, right? I'm saying to Elliot, right? Uh, I think that question has already been answered, right? What I said was what counts as justification in premise one is whatever your epistemology says justification is.
Okay.
I'm happy
So
to play
let's
by your rules.
so let's say that in my epistemology, justification is just going to be like the property of being like subjectively convinced of the truth of something, right? So
Okay.
it seems like if I define justification that way, and I
Yeah.
am subjectively convinced of the truth that I can have knowledge of a banana, right?
Yeah.
Uh, then it seems like that would falsify your first premise.
It would. Well, no, it wouldn't falsify the first premise. It would just be, it would falsify the second premise, right? So the second premise is that you don't have any such justification.
Right, yeah. So it seems
Yeah.
like that would just be like a chink in the armor or something like that.
Yeah, but I don't think
Um,
you want to. I don't think you want to say that because that just means everybody is justified for all their beliefs on your view. So it's just subjective.
which Well, yeah, it could be. So I mean, like, that seems to be the issue, right? Is that subjectivism is a logically possible, like, uh, way of talking about epistemology that would just like falsify your argument. And so if you like, and
I don't. I don't
that's just
see why
one of.
that's a. I don't. I think you're basically saying like, look, if we speculate about all of us drinking poison, then like your idea of us staying alive and not drinking poison would be in trouble. Like, yeah, I don't really think so because I think that's just speculation, right? You don't. I don't think you actually think everybody's beliefs um, are justified, which is why we're
I don't.
having
Well,
this
I don't.
conversation.
That's
So
just not how I talk about justification, right? I don't think there's like I don't think justification is some kind of platonic form out there. Right? I don't think it's like there's like some kind of fact of the matter. I think
well, what do you?
justification really is talking
We could
about
just change.
like
We
what
could
do
just
we
change
call
the.
sufficient warrant, right?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's fine. I think this is entirely semantics. However you want to define it, go for it.
Yeah,
I
but
don't.
it seems like if
I
you have a
disagree.
premise like something along the line, if you have a premise about the existence of God that just depends on my mental states, like that's always going to be a problem, right? Because if you say like, well, if I have this premise, like whether or not God exists, right, is just somehow um, conditionalized on like the mental state that like Elliot has or something like that, then it's just like, well, what does that? I mean, like, what if I just got hit in the head with a rock, right? Like how like that's why I think it's like such a problematic way to even begin the dialogue, right? What if they what like
I don't. I don't see how you getting hit in the head with a rock would falsify the argument.
well, if I got hit in the head with the rock, then I wouldn't be able to produce the justification for like my ability to have knowledge, right? But then we wouldn't be any step closer to knowing if God exists, right? It would just be like that's the whole point. Is that like this weird connection you're trying to make between like
Yeah.
if
So I
God
think. I think what you're really. I think what you're saying, but you're rhetorically staying away from it as a claim, is it is, as a matter of fact, possible that I know it, but I'm unable to produce this knowledge. And I'm going to say, well, but you'd need to have that knowledge to say that it's possible. So it doesn't matter.
uh, disagree. So for instance, right, possibility and like is just going to be like a function of how I think about modality, right? So if I say like
How do
it's
you know that?
logically possible or
How do you
epistemically
know it's
possible,
possible?
that's just how. Or sorry, how do I know what's possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just like, appealing to basic principles, to first principles, right? And then
Yeah.
again, it's like,
So,
is that if that's
okay.
something you disagree with me on, okay, so for instance, if you just like disagree,
What
if you
does it
like
mean? What are the first principles and what does it mean for them to be a first principle?
so those are just going to be axioms of logic, right? And yeah, like those are not things that I'm going to be debating you on, right? Like if you say like actually I think it's possible for like like when I use possibility, it's possible for like A and not A to for A to be not A in the same way, at
It
the
is
same place,
it
at the
is
same time, or
possible,
something like that.
but it is that you're talking about the classical logic, right? So um not zero thought. If you're talking about like some paraconsistent logic, that's possible.
Potentially, yeah, and
Yeah.
without getting into into that, like the modality that I have in mind when I use possibility is just classical, right? So that's like,
Well,
and we could talk about maybe you do have some kind of like other logic, in which case we really would be talking past each other. But like if you
Well,
were just
Elliot,
like, well, that's not how I use possible, then it'd just be like,
By our
okay, well,
logic,
all right, like that.
no, wait,
justification
real quick, guys. Hold on,
okay.
real quick. Guys, I'm almost done here. I'm almost done, and I gotta lock up at work and get off here soon. And by the way, like I know both of us like are going back and forth at each other, but you're a really cool guy, Elliot. Just hope that you haven't gotten offended or
No,
insulted
no,
over the
yeah,
course of this. Okay,
it's very engaging. Yeah,
okay. I
I'm
like
very
you.
tenacious.
We've had cool. We've had these conversations before. You're a cool guy.
Yeah. Um. So
But
like like I guess I would just say like I have in mind kind of like that classical account of possibility, right? And
it
if that's something
sounds
that
like
you don't
Aristotle
accept or
is
like
right up your alley.
uh maybe in some ways, but yeah, and, like, if you were just like, well, I don't know about that classical account of possibility, then that would just like that might be the ball game right there, right? It might just be like, well, we don't even have the same vocabulary of use or usage of these terms. But if
No,
we
it's
do, or if you at least
it's
can understand what I mean by possible, then I think it's fairly straightforward from there. Like how on analysis, I could argue that it is perfectly possible for God not to exist, in virtue of the fact that like the proposition God doesn't exist doesn't contain a self contradiction.
no, that's not the way I'm headed, right? So the chain of justification or the chain of sufficient warrant, whatever terms you want to use here, has been that you know that it's possible for you to have some other account of knowledge, and you know that in virtue of these first principles. Okay, but in virtue of what do you know those first principles?
Yeah, so the virtue of them being first principles are not known in virtue of anything else, right? Like that's what it
Okay,
means for them to be
what
first principles.
what's the ontology of these first principles that they somehow guarantee that you know them?
When you say the ontology, you want me to give like metaphysical properties or something?
Yeah, like what properties do they have that that would justify believing that they have the capacity to make you know them?
What properties do they have that would justify you believing that? I'm not sure that I understand the question. Like they would just be
Okay,
properties of reality that rational minds can
well let
grasp.
me
And
give
that's
you
probably as like
let me give
yeah.
you a
I mean
sorry, I got a fly
yeah.
that's
That's
killing me. Okay, so let me give you a counter, an alternative, right? So a Christian reasoning this fashion might say, like, look, uh, similar but different in some important ways. God is kind of like the first principle of Christians here. You've got this creator who is ruling over the world. He creates human beings, he makes them in his image, and then he talks to them. And so as a result of all this, human beings are um, swimming in knowledge of God, as it were, swimming in revelation. Okay. Here we've got a story, we've got a metaphysical account of how it's impossible for someone to come to exist and not know some principial things, right? They would know that they are a creature, they would know that they're in the image of God, they would know something of what this God is like. They may not be able to articulate those things in this, that, or the other way, but they would have some kind of awareness what's going on in this story, right? But you tell me about like what sounds almost like mathematical formula, and it's like, bro, those don't have any causal power. They're not the kind of things to explain how you know them.
well, I don't. Yeah, the causal story is very easy, right? And I think the causal story on God is going to be problematic too, because you would just have to kind of like take such an entity's word for it that he wouldn't be interested in like deceiving you, or like about like his properties and including all the claims that you just made. But like if that's the case, like if you're gonna treat it as like a first principle, you're just gonna like take that. Um, then it just seems like why would you say that you can make the kind of argument that you offered up earlier, right? Because like that argument would still be a bad argument. I'm not sure what kind of argument you would just say like I have kind of like this. I just kind
Let's
of like
not,
assume God from the outset.
Elliot, let's not lose track of the argument that's being made, right? So I didn't say that I assume God from the outset. I said that he could be compared in order to explain the question that I was asking about first principles, their ontology. I gave an alternative account and said that there are some similarities here. But let's not lose track of the dialogue, right? The reason we got to first principles is that would be the sufficient warrant to falsify premise 2, right? But the entities you've provided don't have anything in the way of a causal story how you would know them. So it seems like you would not know them
Oh, sure they do.
in virtue
Yeah,
of themselves.
like there's nothing that prohibits, right, like minds from developing in a universe in such a way that they can comprehend
What makes it
the
possible for
workings
them
of
to
that
do that?
universe.
What makes it possible for them to do that? I mean, who
There's
cares about
the fact
prohibiting?
that
The question is what makes it possible for them to do that?
there's no constraint. I'm not sure what you would mean by
That
possibility,
just
other
begs
than
the question. I'm
that there's
asking
no
how it's
constraints.
possible.
But remember, I'm not making an argument to persuade you that's true. What you claimed was that there was no causal story that could be told. And that is a causal story that could be told, right?
Look at what you're saying. You're saying it's possible because it's possible, and since it's possible, that's the case that I have, right? That's just
Well,
friend.
I
That's
already
classic
told
God of the
you
gaps reasoning.
I told you what I meant by possible, right? Possible is just going to mean that it doesn't contain any contradiction. And
It's
so,
not
yeah, that
relevant what you
story
mean
doesn't.
by it. You're not. You're. It
It is
doesn't
if you're talking to
alleviate
me.
the. It doesn't alleviate the question begging and God of the gaps fallacies you're making there by clarifying what you meant by possibility.
Look, if I'm not
Whatever you
making
meant
an
by
argument, it's
possibility.
not accurate. Okay, you keep accusing me of question begging when I'm not making arguments, right? I'm not trying to persuade you that that's what's going on. If I were, and that were a premise in my argument, then you could accuse me of question begging. That's not what I'm doing. I really wish you'd stop saying that, right? What you said was that I couldn't give a causal story. I mean, there's all kinds of causal stories out there for the taking that don't involve your God, right? And they're possible
So
simply in virtue of the fact that they are in accord with the definition of possible that I gave. If you
so
dispute
make
that definition, then we're just going to talk past each other. But if you
so make
understand
believe.
it, then that's what I mean.
So
That's
there's
not what
make
make
believe.
believe. No.
We're looking. Then we're looking for a story here where we have reasons to believe it's possible, not just because we repeat the claim that it's possible, right? Like
Look, the reason to
give an
believe it's
explanation.
I don't know what you want. Like, I don't know what you think a reason to believe something is possible is, other than showing that it doesn't contradict itself.
Oh, that's silly, right? If somebody asks me, how do you know this remote can cause the TV to come on? I don't say, well, I can tell the story about how fairies come in the room, and the fairies, they swing their little wands around, and down comes the dust, and when the dust rises on the no, nobody does. That's
Yeah,
not how it works,
that's
right?
that's just
The
one
way
Yeah, but
you
modality.
the
that's
way
but
you the way
but
you
that's still
provide a causal
possible, right?
story,
Like,
the way you provide a causal story is by picking up the remote and turning on the TV, right? You can show that there's a relationship between the two.
okay, first of all, how do you know that when you pick up the remote and turn on the TV, it's not fairies that are invisible that are flitting back and forth?
What does the problem of what does the problem of underdetermination and induction have to do with the conversation we're having
It
right now?
just it undermines your entire point, right? That's my entire like I don't even think you can prove that there's not fairies that are flitting back and forth between. Maybe you think you can. I'd love to see you
Okay,
try.
okay.
Like,
So
so it seems like even you would have to admit it's possible that
okay. So
it doesn't mean it's
you're
plausible or
conceding.
likely.
All right. So I see what's going on. So you're conceding that you have no answer to the problem of underdetermination, and therefore, as a result, you have no way to determine what kind of stories would make for good possibility stories or not. You just make stuff up.
Oh no, I'm not conceding. Yeah, sorry, I never conceded that. Right? There's other considerations that I think allow us to sort of like, for instance, I think that your account is basically like very similar to my account. It gives you all the same things, except it's like metaphysically like over extravagant to the nth degree. So like I think just in the name of parsimony, which is one of the tools that I would use to shave to kind of like uh, n- narrow the slice of underdetermined possibilities. I think that would take away all of like the extraneous metaphysical architecture you posit.
Okay.
I wasn't making that point now though. Like the only point that I was
Besides
making now.
Yeah, besides repeating the claim that it's just possible, what reason do we have to believe that it's possible that minds can just develop from natural phenomena in the universe? I'd like to see that demonstrated at
So
least.
so I did. Can you maybe repeat back to me what I defined possible as?
Yeah, you said that you basically, I think, said that there's no contradiction in the idea.
Okay. Do you understand what I
It's,
mean when I say that there's no self contradiction in an idea?
I think so. You mean that the
Okay,
concept entails no two propositions that are mutually exclusive, or something like that.
okay, right. So would you agree that like if I point to a concept and it doesn't contain a self-contradictory set of premises, that would meet the criteria that I laid out of being possible?
Yes.
Okay.
If you, but here's the thing, right? There's a difference between not knowing whether something has a contradiction in it versus knowing that it doesn't have a contradiction in it. And that's the question that's on the table, right? So there may very well be a contradiction because after all, remember, there's no contradiction in the idea that there might be a contradiction in it.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Well, the I have to. There's no contradiction in the idea that there might be a contradiction. Yeah, I would agree with that, right? So, like, it's possible, right? For instance, that I was hit on the head with a rock yesterday, and like completely erased all of my ability to look at like or to analyze uh, sets of propositions, right? That's possible. Um, I don't see any problem with that. I don't think it's particularly plausible. I have strong inductive and abductive reasons to suspect that that's not the case, but it's possible. Possible just doesn't interest me as much as it seems to interest you, because of just all the number of things that are possible, right? Uh, and it doesn't really get us to like what I'm more interested in, which is plausibility, and what I'm more interested in, which is like basically how well do we have like actual reasons to think that it is true.
Okay, so what reasons do we have to think that it's true that minds can develop from the natural world?
Uh, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. So the first is that the natural world seems to um, be capable, right? It seems to have like the requisite material, right, in order for life to generate. And we see when we look at life and we look at organisms, including organisms with brains and
Can you give me an
organisms with
example?
minds, we see, sure, we look at humans and we look at human DNA and human um, physiology, and we can place that with very strong inductive and abductive evidence, right, within the process of evolution. And we can place evolution within the general chemistry and biochemistry of natural objects within the universe. And so that seems to give good evidence. It seems to raise the probability that actually minds like ours can develop through processes like evolution in a universe like ours.
No, right. So the idea that the universe contains the natural elements and the right causal connections for things like reproduction and evolution doesn't suggest the existence of minds can be derived from any of those elements. In fact, I
Well,
believe
sure it does. When we look at minds, they seem to be heavily contingent upon those very things.
so what?
Um, yeah, so I think that actually provides good evidence that minds, being in some sense products of those biological processes that we were just talking about, can arise from natural processes in a universe like ours.
So I wonder. Uh, I think it takes us
Non
too far afield.
sequitur.
But I wonder how a naturalist knows that mental states are produced by physical things. But putting that entire debate aside, um, yeah. Again, the issue is just that all you're saying is that things that have minds come about through certain processes that are in nature. Okay, that doesn't that presupposes their existence. It's not explaining their
That
existence, right?
presupposes
It's
whose
just explaining their
existence?
continuation.
Their existence is inferred from like our observations of the world, right? Like I don't see how that presupposes their existence.
No, no, no. The question is how minds can derive from matter, right? So something like there can be a mindless explanation for the first mind, or something like that,
I don't
right?
see what the constraint would be. Like it seems like it seems it seems like we would need to justify positing some kind of constraint on the kinds of things that can generate minds. It seems like that's which I don't understand. Like, why would we do that?
Why wouldn't we?
Because we don't. It doesn't seem like we. It
Wha-
doesn't seem like we have any reason to, right? Like we have
Okay,
like
so
we
how do you know that the next time you have flatulence, you're not going to create a mind,
just
right? Like if
and
you,
yeah, it's a very I would say it's a very unparsimonious hypothesis, and it doesn't accord with the any of the inductive evidence that I've gathered about the way that
exactly,
my
right,
flatulence work.
exactly. So we have no inductive evidence that minds derive from mindless material. We only have examples of minds coming from prior minds.
So I mean, it seems like you're just like presupposing dualism, which I would not grant. I don't see any reason to think that minds aren't ways of talking about interactions of material, in which case minds would just be a species of material.
You broke up there for me.
Oh, it seems like you're just
That
like
minds would,
presupposing dualism, right? Like I don't see this. I'm not sure how you're justifying this distinction between mind and material in the first place.
okay, so you think minds are physical things.
Yeah, I definitely lean that way.
Okay, so what do you think a mind is?
I think a mind is like a description of the operations of a brain, like a brain of like a particularly, let's just say, sufficient complexity.
Okay, so I see there's a bit of a language gap, right? So I'm interested in, when I talk about mind, I'm talking about things like thoughts, right? So earlier we were talking about beliefs, for example.
Yeah,
Do you
Right,
think an AI
presumably.
could be a mind?
I do.
Well, let's not
Yeah,
get into that, right? Let's not get into that. But like,
No, but that's how you
mind,
if
that's how
you
you
and I
break
if you
down the
think
physicalist.
if
That's how you break down the physicalist position.
well, I think there are many ways that can be
Oh
problematic
yeah,
for physicalism,
true.
right? But
Yeah.
what I would just say, like, look, uh, what do you take something's being physical to mean?
so like physical is like, going to be like the domain of like the the domain of the definition that I get that I'm most attracted to. I think it's notoriously difficult to define either the physical or like the non-physical, right? For mirror image reasons.
Yeah,
But like I tend to think of it as like the objects that would be describable within a completed theory of physics, right? So like that's probably the closest that I could come to giving like a definition of physical. Would just be like
okay,
the entities that would fall under a completed theory of physics.
cool. All right. So the problem I have with that is that these are going to be the kind of entities that follow physical laws, right?
Um, or
And
or that follow physical probability distributions. Sure.
oh, even worse, right? But yeah. So yeah, I mean, you could have it as a deterministic version or an indeterministic version. But either way, the fact of the matter is that physical laws are indifferent to epistemic virtues and norms. So if the mind were physical, global skepticism would follow.
I disagree. I actually think that there's reasons, really strong reasons to think that assembled as a mind, because they respond to and are part of those like that very same um, reality from which we derive these epistemic virtues and norms, and because the mind is just the kind of thing that can think about and model epistemic virtues and norms. There's no reason to suppose that the mind wouldn't be able to follow along with them. I just think it's a non sequitur. And of
You just
course,
got done saying earlier that you could get hit by a rock and you wouldn't be able to articulate things. You
yeah,
could be suffering from a brain disease now and not even know it.
of course, of
There's no
course that's the
reason to.
case
There's
whether
no way to get.
physicalism. Yeah, this is just that's the case whether physicalism is true or not, right? Like, maybe you don't, maybe you don't think that like dementia exists or something on your dualist worldview. But like if you do, then I think that like those are all just going to be kind of skeptical scenarios that no one is inoculated from.
No, I think the difference is that someone could have reasons for making the distinction between sanity and insanity, a healthy brain and an unhealthy brain, and so forth, on a non-physicalist position. I'm not a dualist myself, but if
Okay,
you're
are
a
you like some kind of idealist or
physical,
something?
no. But if you're a physicalist, right, then all you have are just examples of gray matter doing different operations in, assuming that that's even a good classifications of objects in the world. I don't know how you'd get to that belief
Yeah.
on
Well,
physicalism,
so let
but
me ask you a
suppose,
question real quick.
yeah, go ahead.
'Cause I think we can. Or sorry, my internet went out. Like, would you agree that a calculator is a physical object?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that the law solve like?
You broke up.
Oh,
You
okay.
cut out.
All right.
You cut out.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Do
Do you think that like a computer is a physical object?
Yeah, I do.
you think
Okay.
it's a mind?
Do you think? Well, no, I don't think it's a mind. But I'm wondering, do you think that like implies the falsity of like the programming operations of like a calculator or a computer to note that they're physical? Like, or do you think that they can still like they can still just derive and discover and convey truths about like the laws of mathematics and physics and so on?
The same way that a word or a written number or an abacus is used by minds to convey things. Yes, computers are used by minds to convey things,
Well, the computers
but
can
I
discover
don't
things
think
that
that's
minds don't even know, right?
I
There's
don't think
no
that's true.
wait,
Yeah.
so like there's no mind on Earth, right? Or maybe you think there is, but there's no mind on Earth. Okay, I'll set aside the mind of God, right? Let's set that aside because we're just talking about human minds for now.
Yeah.
Because humans make computers. Like, there's no human mind, right?
Oh
Digit.
man, these drops are
You cut out again.
they're kind of
I might
Just a
have to
bit.
go soon because my internet is laggy. But my point is that there's no
that's
human
big
mind.
gated.
Sorry, what?
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just saying
Yeah,
that's
there's no
big
human
gate.
mind.
Make your point.
Yeah, there's no human mind that can like solve pi out to like the 5 billionth digit or something like that, right?
Elliot,
Or even
So
Elliot, I have a question, right? So are you a predicate? Okay, I was gonna ask if you're a predicate dualist, but it's irrelevant. But I have a very good way to deconstruct physicalism if you're interested to know why your like worldview is just internally just collapses.
really quick, because
Yeah.
he's got to go on, and I really got to go too. So
Okay.
I'm really sorry, Latex, but you'll be around, and
yeah, send it to me if anything, latex. Although I will say that like physicalism is not my worldview. It's potentially one element of my worldview, and not a particularly like one that I'm particularly attached to, as I said earlier.
well,
Just the one that I happen
well,
to think has the fewest problems.
Okay. But
it had better be, since that's the explanatory tool that you're using for how you can know your first principles.
yeah.
Oh,
And also, when you're
I
free,
think
could
those
you send
same
me
explanatory tools are available on
yeah.
non-physicalist worldviews, etc. Right. Given
So
given
we should
physicalism, those
discuss.
explanatory tools could exist. But that could also be the case given idealism or Platonism, or any number of other metaphysics other than Christian theism. So, like, yeah.
So we ought to hear what the explanatory tools are and not address what's unrelated to them.
I mean, I guess it would depend on what you mean like by explanatory tools in this context. Because if I'm going to have a different account by definition of how thinking rational agents like myself came to be on say like physicalism than I might under like Platonism, um, or than I might on some kind of uh, idealism, right? But those accounts are still available, right? And to me, like just looking at them, I'm just interested in like when I find one that has the fewest problems with physicalism.
I don't see how I don't see how first principles
Sorry, can you
that
hear me?
cannot distinguish. Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Just a second.
Elliot, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you
Yeah, we
hear
can
me?
hear you.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, sorry, that goes. Yeah, so like the fact that I'm a physicalist, that doesn't mean that I don't think you can give those kinds of stories from other, from other metaphysical perspectives, because I
but
think you
yeah,
can.
right. So the problem is you'll need to know which it is in order to know that it's not a virtue of God, that you know it's these first principles.
I just don't see how that follows. So, for instance, if I think that God is like a self-contradictory proposition, then depending on how he's defined, I do. Then actually, that would be the case whether or not physicalism was true, or idealism, or Platonism, right?
You wouldn't
So,
be
like,
able to determine that and properly conceptually analyze what God is unless you already had these first principles, and so unless there was already some causal story how you came up to know them.
yeah, but I could have that. I could have that causal story again on physicalism, or idealism, or Platonism, or like any of the, whatever metaphysic you have in mind, right? There's nothing that prohibits me from having those first principles
Yeah, but in order to have that
model of
pluralistic
God
take
that
on
Jimmy keeps talking about is contradictory.
yeah, but in order to have that pluralistic take on the causal story, you'd have to possess the causal story that allows you to know the first principles that then allows you to posit that it could have been other causal stories,
I'd have
right?
to possess a
So
causal story that
on
allows me to know.
we're waiting on we're waiting on the causal story.
Well, first of all, I would need to possess a causal story. I would argue have enough epistemic humility to say that I don't necessarily think that I know the correct uh, metaphysical nature of reality. Right? That
Oh,
there's many different
that's the most
theories bounding
egregious,
around.
bro. That's the
It
most
was
egregious epistemic
Yeah.
arrogance. That's
just say,
Arrogance,
well,
not
yeah,
right?
honest.
I know you would say that actually it's epistemically humble to say that you've solved all the problems of metaphysics because God did it. But I'm like, okay, fair enough. We disagree on that, and I'll leave it to the
You're
audience.
literally
But
Elliot, could you
you're literally
send me
saying that you don't
uh
know enough. You can't solve all these problems. You can't solve the basic problems of epistemology. But the one thing that you do know is it's not God. Yeah, I think
no,
that's terribly
I'm not
arrogant.
saying that at all. I can solve them, right? There's all kinds of potential solutions, right? The point is that like I'm just not necessarily sure which, if any of them, is the best way to actually think about reality.
You
In
can't
many
be in a
cases, they
position you can't be in a position to judge which are possible, which are
exactly.
better or worse,
how
Is that a
does
unless you
that
fact?
how
already
does
have
yeah
the answer.
that's just a non sequitur, right? Like you just like
No, it isn't.
it's just an utter non sequitur. It does not
If
follow.
you
It's pretty obvious.
if you're not fundamentally certain about anything, right? Then when you're saying that there are multiple possibilities or interpretations, is that a objective kind of claim, or like it's not, is it? So
Yeah, it is, right?
You're a guy
Given the
saying,
it's
"Hey,
not.
definition that
See,
I've given,
you're
I have all
contradicting
these
yourself. You're
I have all
contradicting
these
yourself.
different
it's not
pieces
a
of."
contradiction.
You're like a guy sitting here. I've got all these different red objects in front of me, and I'm going to sort them into the most delicious of apples. I have no idea what
Uh,
an apple is. I have no idea how to tell
no,
a healthy apple from an unhealthy apple.
you're the
But
one.
boy, oh
You're the
boy, am
one.
I just going to
Okay.
start eating these apples and figuring out which, like, that's
You
nonsense.
are
Yeah.
you are the one claiming that that's an entailment of my view, but you haven't in an hour and a half of talking, you haven't been able to produce any evidence for that other than just repeating the claim. The example that I gave is actually far more analogous, right? I can know that I'm hanging, or I can know that I'm standing on something, right? And I might not even know what it is. Maybe there's a bunch of us, and one person thinks that I'm standing on a sack of potatoes. One person thinks that I'm standing on, a bridge. One person thinks that I'm standing on the backs of ferries, right? But that doesn't prohibit me from saying, well, I can rule out that I'm standing on a pile of married bachelors. right? The fact that I like I don't have to know what it is I'm standing on in order to
Are you
rule
a
that out.
predicate
Yes, you
clause?
would. You would have to know. You'd have to say it has properties that
What
are
is
not
this? Like,
compatible with a married bachelor. You would have to know that.
Okay, but I wouldn't have to know what it is. Would you agree with that?
That is knowing something about what it is.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't have to know exactly what it is, right? I wouldn't have to distinguish between multiple mutually incompatible assertions about what it is.
Yes, you would, because
Oh,
all you're
because
doing is
there's
pushing the buck back to prior knowledge about what it could be, which you can only know in virtue of knowing something about what the actual world is.
uh, I think that's just going to be the fundamental claim we disagree on. I think it's a non sequitur, and I don't think that you keep claiming it as if that follows from the fact that I acknowledge the possibility of multiple different metaphysical uh, models, right? But the thing is
How
that
did
like
you come to know that those were possible?
I already explained it on
Yeah,
analysis
but which
of their
your
on
explanation
analysis
required you to know a lot prior.
of their propositional claims and the fact that the propositional claims don't contain self contradictions. The same way that I analyze whether anything is possible.
Right, which you're supposed to know in terms of some causal story, you know.
Uh, no, sorry, possibility don't rely on a causal story, right? Whether it's possible doesn't rely on a causal story.
The
My knowledge of whether it's
knowledge
possible
of the first
would,
principles that you use to
yeah,
determine what's possible rely on a causal story. So knowing
yeah,
that
the
it's a
knowledge
causal
itself, yeah,
story, knowing that it's a causal story that doesn't include the Christian God is of the essence. What is that story?
yeah. The causal story doesn't necessarily include the Christian God.
Okay, what's the
That's the
demonstration
claim
of
that
that
I'm
claim?
making. The fact that there's all kinds of causal stories that can be told without self contradiction.
You know that there's these causal stories because you have access to principles that you get from a causal story that you know can be a causal story because you know there are these possibilities. Do you not see how that's a logical circle?
I'm not making sorry. When I make a claim about possibility and how I'm defining possibility, I'm not trying to persuade you or make an argument, right? So if you reject my claim about what possibility even means, then I'm not going to make a circular argument to you. I'm just going to say, oh, okay, well, then we just agree to disagree. So if you like, if the problem here is that you're just not stipulating that, then again, it's either going to be like you stipulate it and we progress the conversation, or you don't stipulate it and we just are just not using language the same way. But if you do stipulate it,
It's
your
not a it's
questions
not
are
a
very
semantic issue.
yeah, well, if you do stipulate, your questions are very easily resolvable. And I would love for you to answer the one I just asked, which is how do you justify that it's necessary for that God is part of the causal story?
Because he's revealed it.
Okay. Is it necessary that he's revealed it?
In order for us to know anything, sure.
Okay. And how do you know that?
That's been revealed too.
Okay. So you basically are going to appeal to revelation. And then if I ask you to justify your revelation, you're just going to say that it's been revealed. Are you omniscient, Jimmy?
No.
Okay. Are you infallible?
If so, the question is a little bit ambiguous. If you mean, does Jimmy have the property of never failing to err, or always avoiding error? No, I don't have that property. If you mean something like, do you have infallible beliefs? Then I'd say, yeah, sure.
by virtue of God.
Sorry,
That's why.
are you
Yeah.
infallible about which beliefs
Mhm.
are your fallible beliefs and which ones aren't?
In some cases, yeah.
In, okay, is it uh, are there cases where you're not infallible about which beliefs are you're infallible about?
Yeah. So I think
Okay, so how do you know that your belief in revelation isn't one of those cases?
because it's one of the ones where I have infallible justification.
But you just said there are
Because it's
some.
one of my infallible beliefs.
You just said that there were some beliefs in which you're mistaken about your infallibility, right?
No, I said I have some beliefs where I don't have infallible justification about whether or not they count
Okay,
in the group of infallible beliefs.
yeah. So how do you know that the belief in revelation isn't one of those beliefs?
Because I infallibly
Self-actualizing.
know
Do you see
that
the
it's one of
problem?
those. Yeah.
No,
There's
we don't see the
what
problem.
problem?
This is like asking, how do you know if it's possible that truth doesn't exist?
Well, no, it's
Like
not like it's
it's a
actually not
dumb.
like that even a little bit.
It is
But
actually like that. It's actually
what
exactly
you've
because it's a
admitted,
proper
Jimmy,
superset of truth. It's a proper superset. So obviously
what
it
you
would be.
what you've admitted is that you're
We've
not
encapsulated that.
infallible with
Wait.
regard to what
Let
you've
Elliot
admitted
finish.
is that you're not infallible with regard to which beliefs you hold infallibly, right? There's no
In
such
some
thing as like
cases.
partially infallible, right? Because like you don't know, like but, you know, and you wouldn't infallibly know what you
No, what I said was in some cases, right? So there are some beliefs where I
to
have
make
good
if you don't
reason
want
to
to be in
think.
the business of claiming to be like God or something. But it's just gonna create all those same problems on your worldview, right? Because it's just gonna open the door to the fact that on your worldview, it seems like since you don't have this perfect infallibility about which of your beliefs are infallible, that you could just be wrong about um,
It,
the fact that like God
it's
has revealed or the content of God's revelation, right?
so I take it as somewhat indirect evidence of a view when there has been a lot of evidence put on the table for it. There's been a lot of back and forth in the conversation. And then towards the end of a conversation, someone has to topple over a straw man in order to try to make objections against it. Right. So what I
What
actually had said,
misrepresentation did I make of it? Yeah, please.
yeah, the misrepresentation was I didn't say I was fallible in my belief about all my beliefs, whether they're infallible or not. What I said was that in some cases, I have infallible justification that's reflexive. In other words, I infallibly know that I infallibly know, right? Turtles all the way down, right?
Yeah,
There are other cases where I don't have reflexive infallibility, right? So I may infallibly know, but then I don't have some second order justification about whether that was infallible or not. But the fact that those two classes of knowledge that exist in my mind don't present anything in the way of an entailment,
that's
then
why.
any or all of my beliefs
Yeah, that's
could
why
fall into the second class.
I addressed this because that's why I asked you if you could infallibly tell the difference, and you said sometimes, and that's where you sunk your boat, right? Because that's just the same thing as saying that you can't infallibly tell the difference, right? And if you can't
Well,
infallibly tell the difference, then you're not going to be able to appeal to
Wait,
infallibility
aren't
for
you
those
presuppose?
beliefs.
Wait, guys. Let me show you something. Aren't you presupposing logic when you make judgments about whether or not someone is subjectively infallible in their estimation of the veracity of God's divine revelation? So you're presupposing that logic, like there cannot be like a true contradiction in which they are both fallible and infallible simultaneously. Like you're presupposing that, like the law
well,
of non-contradiction.
If Jimmy
You're
I
wants
think
to make that
presupposing.
claim, he's
You're already
welcome to.
You're
yeah,
using the tools God
hold on,
has given
latex.
you.
Hold on,
You're
latex.
using the tools God has. Yeah,
This will
go
be my
ahead.
last comment. This will be my last comment, right?
Okay,
So
go
what
ahead.
I said, I don't know what I was responding to in
It's just
response
stupid.
to saying
Like,
sometimes, but sometimes sometimes doesn't answer the question whether there are no infallible cases of differentiating those two, right? I think I think you're just seeking for there to be a regress where there's no regress, because the whole point is that the event of revelation is sufficient to know God. Full stop, right? So asking
Yeah, that's
questions about
the claim.
ask okay, but asking questions about how you can have second order justifications about these things is really quite irrelevant, because the whole point was the root for those justifications would expand to any kind of second order question. So yes, all of that is
No,
taken care of.
it's the other way around, right? It's actually the case that like if on a second, like if we go to the second K, right, and the second K itself isn't infallible, then that's just going to infect the first
That's not what the what I, what
K,
I'm
that there's
saying
some
is that the
beliefs.
second K is
You're claiming that
what I'm saying is that what I'm saying is that the second K is made infallible by the first K. Right? There's
that's the
no
case, then you shouldn't have said some of the time, right? Because I asked you if there were some beliefs If you were infallible, and you said that you had some beliefs in which you were infallible, and some beliefs that you weren't, and I will note for the instance that you're the one claiming to epistemic humility here, right? But setting that aside, you claim that there's these two buckets of your beliefs: infallible ones and ones that aren't infallible. And so I asked you, can you infallibly tell the difference between the two? And you said some of the time.
I don't see how that's
Which just means that you can't infallibly tell the difference between the two,
no.
because
It
it means
means
that some of the time you can't tell, like which means that some of the time you're fallible when
some
attempting
of
to
the
distinguish
time
between the two.
means no. Some of the time means some beliefs I can distinguish, some beliefs I can't. Right. So for let's be specific, and we'll see that this is really rather quite silly. Right. So I have beliefs about the salvation of other Christians. It is my position that a Christian can have infallible knowledge of another Christian's salvific state. But I don't know whether or not they can have second order knowledge about that. That is likewise infallible. So it may be the case that they have some kind of um, first person awareness that someone else is a Christian and that that knowledge is secure in the highest form. But then they don't have an ability to analyze that knowledge in a way where it would be forthcoming as infallible. I can also
So
have
could
other
they?
beliefs like that God exists and that he's controlling everything that's happened, and that belief would be infallible. And any attempt to transcend that level belief and look at second or third or fourth or whatever order beliefs would all just be infallible turtles all the way down. Does the fact that the former example, in the case of beliefs that have nothing to do with um, the truth of Christianity, I can't have infallible second order logic, pose a threat to the revelatory beliefs about the essence of Christian metaphysics and epistemology and morality? No, this is just obvious.
Well, it does if you're not infallible when you make the distinction. So you just made a claim that one belief is one kind, another belief is one kind, and the question is, are you infallible when you assess which of your beliefs are infallible?
Yeah, if you're so, I don't understand the question. Are you asking when I differentiate between uh, the essentials of Christianity and the belief in the classification of these beliefs, and I'm saying the former is infallible and the latter is not? Is that what you're talking about? Does that answer the question?
However it is you differentiate, I'm just wondering if you are infallible, in which bucket you put your beliefs into. So are you infallible about which of your beliefs are infallible?
Regarding beliefs about Christianity, yes, which is all
Uh,
that's all necessary.
are there other beliefs that you're not infallible about?
In my classification or in the beliefs themselves?
Or sorry, so you're infallible about all your beliefs about Christianity?
I'm infallible about the essential truth of Christianity.
Okay, are you infallible about what counts as an essential truth?
Yeah, I don't know that I would be infallible to articulate it, but yeah.
You're okay, you don't know that you would be infallible in your articulation, but you have infallible knowledge.
Right.
That's your claim. Okay. Do you think that as a non-omniscient human, do you think that, or maybe I'll ask you about humans in general. Do you think that a human being, any human being, could possibly be mistaken about being infallible? Do you think it's possible for a human being to be
On a
convinced that
specific
they
belief?
are, yeah, on a specific belief? Do you think it's possible for a human being to be convinced that they hold a belief infallibly when they really don't?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Um, how do you know you're not one of those people?
Because it's been revealed.
So here's the thing, right? Do you think it's possible for a person to be convinced that they have an infallible belief that's been revealed? I'm gonna chase you
Not
all the
if
way
it's
down, dude.
congruent. Not if it's congruent with
But
God's
I,
divine
yeah,
revelation. No.
look, I'm gonna skip it because I don't think this is
Okay.
worth pursuing in
Well,
this fashion, right? So what I'm
all right.
going to say is that revelation is the sufficient condition of knowledge. Period.
Yeah, but
Now,
you would agree that God has created a world in which people are convinced they have revelation and they're mistaken about it.
okay, how is that incompatible with the statement that revelation is a sufficient condition of knowledge of Christianity?
Um, it seems to imply a tension, right? Because it's if revelation, since you're not You can be convinced of revelation. God has created a world in which you could be convinced of revelation when you don't actually have revelation, right? And if
I'm not
that's the
seeing the
case, I just
contradiction.
don't. I just don't know what you would mean, what it would mean to say revelation is a sufficient condition. If it's also the case that revelation underdetermines whether or not you actually, or whether that God has actually spoken to you, right? Because like people can be convinced of
I don't know
revelation.
why that would be. I don't know why that would become unclear because of that scenario.
So there are people who are utterly convinced that they have revelation,
Okay.
right? And you're not able to articulate anything other than the fact that you're convinced you really do have revelation as a reason why you're not one of those people. If you don't
I've
see the
never
problem
said
with
that.
that, then that's all.
I've never said
Well,
that.
that's all you said. Like I asked you how you know you're not one of those people, and you just appealed to revelation, which I take to just be like you just are telling me how convinced you are you have revelation.
Look again. So this is the third time I'm making this clarification, which was made twice before in the conversation. There's a difference between making an argument for your view and knowing your view. One involves providing some kind of inferential justification, right? It involves making a persuasive case aimed at another person. The other involves having some kind of justification in general. It could be an argument.
Yeah, I'm talking
Could
about the
be,
second. I'm
yeah.
talking about your knowledge. Like from your perspective, the fact that you're convinced you have revelation shouldn't be persuasive because there's that God, that even if God exists, He's created some people who are falsely convinced they have revelation.
Okay. How does that make them not know that the revelation?
Yeah, but
that they have is the Christian God?
You've derived that on the basis of his revelation.
Right.
So you have to. His revelation has to be
no.
true for that derivation
Latex.
to be true.
I'm
You
sorry.
see?
I just really don't want
No,
that.
you're no.
What do you mean?
I don't
No,
think
this is like the inference
listen.
structure of.
No. Hold on, bro. Hold on.
Okay.
Listen. No, the issue is there's no contradiction, right? A person can be convinced falsely that they have revelations from some deity and contradict Christianity and all this stuff, and still have knowledge of Christianity and virtue of God's revelation. There's no contradiction there. So I don't know what the tension is supposed to be.
Oh yeah, right. But like the things that you're
You're saying,
postulating
how
could
do you know
be
you're not
like,
one of those
yeah,
people? Is what
that
you're saying.
just because like if you were one of those
How
people,
do
then
I
everything you're
know?
saying
How do I know
about
that I'm not an unbeliever?
no, like everything you're saying about God, right? What I'm pointing out is that everything that you're saying about God could just be like you're basically appealing to people having like two layers of knowledge, right? So they are convinced of revelation, but you actually think they have true revelation like buried underneath that. But if that's the case, then I just don't see how you know you're not one of those people, and that underneath all of your claims about the Christian God, the true knowledge of like Cthulhu isn't buried or something. I just don't
Why would
see
that?
how.
I don't know how that would be possible given the revelation I have is a sufficient condition of knowledge.
Exactly. Just
And as
like
I predicted, the only thing you're able to appeal to is just the claim that you have revelation. That doesn't get you out of this
No,
Yeah,
problem
but I got
no,
because
you out of it
you,
because
you no, no,
I
all of
listen,
those
showed
listen.
that.
people claim they have revelation.
Yeah,
No, listen.
because the way you
You were
derive
no
that those people claim
latex.
that.
Hold on.
Okay, go
You
on then.
you were attempting to make a reductio ad absurdum. Your reductio ad absurdum imposed suppositions that are not part of my position. So it's perfectly fair for me to say, look, I don't go out of my way to grant you that it's possible for these skeptical scenarios to arise. You're going to actually have to do the hard work of showing that those arise from my system.
But
Right?
I would argue
But
that
that's
you
not
could
what you're
always.
doing.
I would argue you're just going in
You cut out.
case that on
yeah,
your
Alex.
belief, God creates people who are convinced that they have revelation or accurate revelation when in fact they truly don't.
We missed a lot of that, bro. You
Yeah,
cut out.
you cut out the
Revelation
first part.
doesn't
up. You're
Ooh,
cutting out again. You
to
the
be known.
internet is bad.
you gotta fix that.
Hello, Elliot. You there?
Too bad he died in that horrible technology accident.
Wait, but Satan isn't he? Doesn't he
Like,
like
can you hear me?
presuppose? Doesn't any consideration about from what he's saying? Doesn't any consideration about the the veracity of or the whatever he's saying about someone else, doesn't that presuppose I don't want to use the word presuppose, but isn't that preconditioned by God's revelation?
It's an
I think
internal
I think
critique.
so, but I don't. Yeah, but right. So I think the
Like,
issue is he's trying to make an internal critique, and all I have to
yeah,
do,
that's what I mean.
and I think it's silly to. This is why it's silly, because Eliot's response after I point out that the internal critique is really a straw man is to say, "Aha! Look, all you can do in response to an external critique is say, but I have." Or all you can do in order to persuade an unbeliever is say, but aha, I have revelation.
Mhm.
That's not what I was trying to do. All I was trying to do was disarm an internal critique. And all I
No,
have
I'm
to
saying
do
all
to do that.
this is a problem for you, regardless of whether the view
Oh
is
dear.
one in which God has created a world in which there's a bunch of people running around who think that they have revelation but really don't.
Yeah, but
Right? So now you
That's
are
not,
someone
how
who
does
thinks
that
he has
contradict,
revelation.
how does that contradict
So
my view?
it
I'm
doesn't follow.
so
waiting.
well,
There's
here's
no
here's the
tension.
problem it creates. Here's the problem it creates for you, right? Since it's the case that even if God exists, there are many humans who can still be mistaken. It seems like you would need a reason to think that you're not one of those people. And it seems like just appealing to the fact that you believe you have revelation is not going to be enough to differentiate you from those people because they will all appeal to that.
Okay, so let's be clear about the scenario real quick, and then I gotta go. So this will be my last response. In the scenario, we're talking about unbelievers that have been deceived about false revelations. Okay. Um, it wouldn't follow that because I'm an unbeliever that I don't know Christianity is true, or that there's a contradiction in Christian epistemology or for the Christian worldview or anything like that. It's just not a disproof. The skeptical scenario is really aimed at saying not how do you know your worldview is true, but how do you know that you actually believe your worldview. It's a very strange scenario. Well, I suppose because believers have regeneration, they're the third person of the Trinity regenerates them, enters them, and is in a process of sanctifying them over the course of their life. They may have all kinds of second order evidences on top of that, right? They can reflect on their beliefs that they're Christians. They can reflect on certain acts that they do that exhibit their faith. They can repent from their sin and so practice their faith in a sense, right? So I don't know how a person. I don't know how a person could be deceived unless they want to be deceived about this matter. It would be a case of self deception.
Do you think that everyone who wants to be deceived knows they want to be deceived?
No, I don't.
Okay, so how do you know you're not one of those people?
Oh, I just answered that question, right?
I don't see how anything you said would actually you can talk about reflecting on your spiritual walk and like your liturgical practices and like the process of how you understand regeneration. Those are all just things that you think have been revealed to you and that you think you have a correct interpretation of scripture for. Like all like what you think has been revealed and your interpretation of scripture is precisely what's in question right now, right? Because you could be one of those people who like wants to deceive themselves and doesn't know it.
I don't see how
Jimmy,
that
am
could
I
be the
right in
case.
saying that? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, am I right in saying that the question kind of is really striking at the difference between your explication of that knowledge, or would you be able to explain it versus knowing the difference? It just seems clear that it would be knowing the difference would be clear because if God is making you to know a particular thing, then you would know that. But whether or not you can explain it sounds like it's something different. Or am I misunderstanding what's being
Uh,
said?
I, don't- I don't know. That might be a helpful distinction. I just don't see how the situation would flow given a Christian has the Holy Spirit. It seems to me like this problem presupposes that a person um, is an unbeliever and doesn't have good evidence that they're. It presupposes the person doesn't have good evidence that they're not deceived in this way, and it presupposes that the person is an unbeliever in some sense, because apparently their desire is such that they can be thwarted from those evidences. Well, it could only be thwarted in that way if they were such a degenerate person. So this is a very extreme scenario that's being presented here. It seems to me that because of that's exactly why it would be so easy to know that you're not that kind of person, because you either have the spirit or you don't have these kinds of desires. That's not normal.
Do you? I mean, do you
Somebody
think?
who
Sorry.
go ahead.
Do you think someone can be mistaken about whether they have the spirit?
Yeah, but I think that they can. I think that so I think that somebody could be.
Um,
Um, I think that somebody could be.
Oh, sorry. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Can you repeat your answer? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, so I think like an unbeliever could believe they have the spirit and not have the spirit, right? I don't think a Christian fails to know in some level that they have the spirit.
Well, do you think? I assume you think all Christians have the spirit, right?
That's right.
Okay, but there are some Christians who you would acknowledge have a wrong view of God, or do you think all Christians have a correct view of God or correctly interpret His revelation?
I think it's a matter of degree. So I
yeah,
think
but even
Christians
if
get.
yeah, but can I just quickly say something? Even if he acknowledges that, that's predicated on his knowledge of God and derived from God. So if that implies that his own worldview is negated, then that's just a contradiction. You can't have that. So that's why like it's an incoherent critique, because it's just it's
You,
affirming
so
a
I mean,
contradiction
I think it's just
you're
raising a
wanting.
skeptical
in the
scenario. It's not an
critique.
incoherent. It's not an
It
incoherent
is.
critique
It
to
is.
just raise a skeptical
Well,
scenario. If
all right,
because like
guys, I gotta go.
yeah,
I really gotta go. But yeah, so the issue is just I don't see. Maybe if you wanna like write down what you
I
think is like a skeptical
I can I can
scenario that wait real
I
quick
can
like
simplify it. I can simplify it. God implies that I have knowledge that certain people have fallible beliefs. Okay, but so that's the consequent, right? The consequent, you're saying, implies that I could have possibly not the antecedent. So you're saying the consequent, okay, the instantiation of the consequent implies the possible negation of the antecedent. Okay, that's impossible. So your critique is stillborn.
that's literally the whole point of an internal critique
No,
is to tease out
your
I
critique
those
yeah
kinds of.
is stillborn. Like
I think that argument maybe needs some work. But here's what I'd say, right?
okay,
So
okay.
if you can write down, Elliot, maybe if you think that you've been unclear, I don't see what the tension is supposed to be,
Yeah, I mean, I
honestly.
think it's
But
basically
if you
that you have a skeptical scenario even in on your worldview, right? Is that you have on your worldview, God, like because God is not a guarantor of true beliefs about God, even if He does exist, because you acknowledge that there are people and even Christians who have mistaken beliefs about God. So it seems like God has created a world in which actually there are humans who sincerely and are convinced that they do have correct beliefs about Him in His revelation, when in fact they don't. And if He's
it's
created a
not
world like
sincere,
that,
right?
it seems people who are mistaken about whether they have sincere beliefs, right? So
Ellie, you don't even
they're
distinguish between essentials and audiopera, dude. It's so
they're
sweepingly general. Dude,
they're
there's essentials and there's audiopera, not essentials.
they're
Which one do you pick
yeah,
from up?
yeah,
Essentials or
I'm just
non-essentials?
sorry.
You gotta be
If I
clear
could
on
just
this.
finish,
You
if
gotta
I
be
could
clear
just
on this.
finish
Please do.
addressing,
Okay.
if I could just
You're
finish
on
addressing, it doesn't look,
two points.
look.
2 points.
Your
2
view on
points.
what are essentials and non-essentials are
That's
just
pretty
going to be
important.
in the
Jimmy brought that
Oh
up
my
earlier.
God,
That's
the
just,
cry
Jimmy brought
dude.
that
baby
up
stuff.
earlier.
Please
Guys,
stop.
I will. I don't
guys.
know.
Asking for a
I
little bit of
wish
specificity here, Elliot, to cooperate. We've been listening to
I'd
generally
like to.
sweeping for 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, okay. I'll
Yeah, I
make a
really
closing.
appreciated
It's not
your
useful.
line of questioning, man. I think that you had some really good questions, and I think that guy who bailed kind of skirted most of what you said and wasn't very coherent.
Oh, if you're talking about Jimmy, I think he was an excellent interlocutor, and I don't think he bailed. And yeah,
Well, he didn't. He still
you know,
didn't seem to
there's
have anything for you in the way of like, how you could differentiate between his beliefs and someone who's wrong.
Scripture.
uh,
I don't think that was the question.
I think, but like, I think they would need to be teased out further. And I actually will. I might take you up on that, Jimmy, and kind of try to articulate this as like an argument, like or articulate it in
do
like a
that.
written form for you to interact with.
That would be great. Right? So I
Yeah.
think then we could see like what it might be clear what's going on. But like, just, since that question has been asked, I know I keep saying I'm going to leave, but like, look, there's a difference between asking how do you know.
I do apologize
versus
for
what are.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I know. I think. Let me apologize to Matt because Matt, I honestly think your critique of Elliot belongs more to me. I tend to. I get talking and then I talk too much. But just to see real quick, it's so funny.
Yeah, Jimmy, and I told Vincent earlier you talk way too much, and he didn't listen. So I agree.
I do. I apologize. See, look, there's a difference between asking someone what means they have of knowing that they have a different epistemic status than someone else versus asking them what tools they would use to show how to differentiate his epistemic status from this other person, right? So we could easily go to passages in scripture and interpret those passages and show, hey, look, this obviously teaches XYZ. This person is saying not XYZ. There you have the difference between our worldviews, right? We're standing here and trying to agree as much as possible with this text. That person over there is actually disagreeing with it. I don't see what was.
Well,
I don't think there was much
can
bite
I
in that
can
question.
I ask a clarifying
The kind of
question?
problem
Though?
I'm posing
Go ahead.
goes
You
to
want
your
to clarify,
interpretations. Oh yeah, I was just saying like the kind of question I'm asking isn't just about Revelation. So like I only use
Oh,
Revelation because that's what you appeal
Elliot.
to for much of.
Wait.
Oh yeah.
No, I wasn't addressing your. No, I think your question wasn't that. I was addressing C, right? So I think C
Okay.
was
Yeah, that's
asking
fine. That's
that
fine.
kind of
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
I think your question was much deeper. You're basically asking like, hey, look, how do you know that there's not some kind of person out there who can be deceived about this so badly that they have no way of um, classifying their beliefs properly? I think is what you're aiming. That's something close. I think that's in the ballpark of what you're aiming at. Let's say, right?
Yeah.
And I just think that this epistemology has the right means so that those situations are in principle avoided.
Yeah, such a person cannot exist, basically.
Well,
with
that's
respect
not what he
to
wants
God.
to say. But yeah.
In principle, meaning that look, the kind of person who fits that scenario has very special explanations that are part of his own decision making, so that it's not really a skeptical scenario for Christianity. It's just a skeptical scenario for any world, for any kind of epistemology where a person can deceive themselves to that.
Right, but how would you determine whether or not someone's interpreting literature correctly from a base level, right? Epistemologically.
See, that's a very different question.
Well, no, it seems like that's what you're appealing to most of the time. And my argument would just be, well, why should I trust someone as having really good reading comprehension when it comes to divine literature?
Well, for one thing, you can read it yourself. It's a public
Right,
document.
but when I read it, I wasn't impressed with the story, and I didn't think it sounded like it was,
Yeah, there's a presupposition there that divine literature wouldn't be understandable.
No, I think it is understandable. I just don't understand what makes someone really good at divine literature interpretation when, if we were to test other realms of reading comprehension, maybe they're not so good at it.
I kind of doubt that. Like the kind of people that I follow in academia are not the kind of people that struggle with interpreting texts.
Okay.
But
So would you claim that you're pretty good at reading
Doesn't the revelation state that it's like a kind of analytic a priori knowledge? It's not like a concept being handed to you, but it's a concept
that's
you
Eliot's.
have within you.
There's two different things going on here. So Eliot is more interested in like the global skepticism problem. C is more interested in like the interpretation question.
I'm kind of interested in
I will just say, like, I actually will be taking my leave, and you can have more of a one-on-one with C. But
Elliot,
like, actually,
could you
we're
also send me your syllogistic defeater for God?
Yeah, I don't want to
since you're an
hijack
atheist.
it. I don't want to hijack your conversation.
Oh no, you're not hijacking. No, it's fine. Honestly, that's where the conversation would have gone, as because like that was the next move, was like Jimmy's appeal to like comparing against
Right.
scripture, and then I would just say, are there people who can be sincerely mistaken about their interpretation of
Exactly.
scripture?
Yeah, that's what I
And I
thought.
think
That's
that's
what I thought
where
you were
I think
saying.
that's where the dialogue would go. But yeah, I'll try and tease it out in maybe a written form. I'd love to kind of interact with you on that objection in the future. And as always, it's good talking to you, Jimmy.